Chapter 82. The Honor and Glory of Whaling. There are some enterprises in which a careful disorderliness is the true method. The more I dive into this matter of whaling and push my researches up to the very springhead of it, so much the more am I impressed with its great honorableness and antiquity, and especially when I find so many great demigods and heroes, prophets of all sorts, who one way or another have shed distinction upon it. I am transported with the reflection that I myself belong, though but subordinately, to so emblazoned a fraternity. The gallant Perseus, a son of Jupiter, was the first whaleman, and to the eternal honor of our calling it, be it said that the first whale attacked by our brotherhood was not killed with any sordid intent. Those were the nightly days of our profession, when we only bore arms to succor the distressed, and not to fill men's lamp feeders. Everyone knows the story of Perseus and Andromeda, how the lovely Andromeda, the daughter of a king, was tied to a rock on the seacoast, and as Leviathan was in the very act of carrying her off, Perseus, the prince of whalemen, intrepidly advancing, harpooned the monster and delivered and married the maid. It was an admirable artistic exploit, rarely achieved by the best harpooners of the present day, inasmuch as this Leviathan was slain at the very first start. And let no man doubt this archite story, for in the ancient Joppa, now Jaffa, on the Syrian coast, in one of the pagan temples, there stood for many ages the vast skeleton of a whale, which the city's legends and all the inhabitants asserted to be the identical bones of the monster that Perseus slew. When the Romans took Joppa, the same skeleton was carried to Italy in triumph. What seems most singular and suggestively important in this story is this: it was from Joppa that Jonah set sail. Akin to the adventure of Perseus and Andromeda, indeed by some supposed to be indirectly derived from it, is that famous story of St. George and the dragon, which dragon I maintained to have been a whale. For in many old chronicles, whales and dragons are strangely jumbled together and often stand for each other. Thou art as a lion of the waters and as a dragon of the sea, saith Ezekiel, hereby plainly meaning a whale. In truth, some versions of the Bible use that word itself. Besides, it would much subtract from the glory of the exploit had St. George but encountered a crawling reptile of the land, instead of doing battle with the great monster of the deep. Any man may kill a snake, but only a Perseus, a St. George, a coffin, have the heart in them to march boldly up to a whale. Let not the modern paintings of this scene mislead us, for though the creature encountered by that valiant whaleman of old is vaguely represented of a griffin-like shape, and though the battle is depicted on land and the saint on horseback, yet considering the great ignorance of those times when the true form of the whale was unknown to artists, and considering that, as in Perseus's case, St. George's whale might have crawled up out of the sea on the beach, and considering that the animal ridden by St. George might have only been a large seal or seahorse. Bearing all this in mind, it will not appear altogether incompatible with the sacred legend and the ancientest drafts of the scene to hold this so-called dragon no other than the great Leviathan himself. In fact, placed before the strict and piercing truth, this whole story will fare like that fish, flesh, and fowl idol of the Philistines, Dagon by name, who, being planted before the ark of Israel, his horse's head and both the palms of his hands fell off from him, and only the stump or fishy part of him remained. Thus, then, one of our own noble stamp, even a whaleman, is a tutelary guardian of England, and by good rights we harpooners of Nantucket should be enrolled in the most noble order of St. George, and therefore let not the knights of that honorable company, none of whom I venture to say have ever had to do with a whale like their great patron, let them never eye a Nantucketer with disdain, since even in our woolen frocks and tarred trousers, we are much better entitled to St. George's decoration than they. Whether to admit Hercules among us or not, concerning this, I long remained dubious, although according to the Greek mythologies, that antique Crockett and Kit Carson, that brawny doer of rejoicing good deeds, was swallowed down and thrown up by a whale. Still, whether that strictly makes a whaleman of him, that might be mooted. It nowhere appears that he ever actually harpooned his fish, unless indeed from the inside. Nevertheless, he may be deemed sort of involuntary winning. At any rate, the whale caught him, if he did not the whale. I claim him for one of our clan. But by the best contradictory authorities, this Grecian story of Hercules and the whale is considered to be derived from the still more ancient Hebrew story of Jonah and the whale, and vice versa. Certainly, they're very similar. If I claim the demigod, then why not the prophet? Nor do heroes, saints, demigods, and prophets alone comprise the whole roll of our order. Our grand master is still to be named. For like royal kings of old times, we find the headwaters of our fraternity in nothing short of the great gods themselves. That wondrous oriental story is now to be rehearsed from the Shastra, which gives us the dread Vishnu, one of the three persons in the Godhead of the Hindus. Gives us this divine Vishnu himself for our Lord. Vishnu, who by the first of his 10 earthly incarnations has forever set apart and sanctified the whale. When Brahma, or the god of gods, saith the Shastra, resolved to recreate the world after one of its periodical dissolutions, he gave birth to Vishnu to preside over the work. But the Vedas, or mystical books, whose perusal would seem to have been indispensable to Vishnu before beginning the creation, and which therefore must have contained something in the shape of practical hints to young architects, these Vedas were lying at the bottom of the waters. So Vishnu became incarnate in a whale, and sounding down in him to the uttermost depths, rescued the sacred volumes. Was not this Vishnu a whaleman then? Even as a man who rides a horse is called a horseman? Perseus, St. George, Hercules, Jonah, and Vishnu. There's a member roll for you. What club but the whaleman's can head off like that? Chapter 83. Jonah historically regarded. Reference was made to the historical story of Jonah and the whale in the preceding chapter. Now some Nantucketers rather distrust this historical story of Jonah and the whale. But then there were some skeptical Greeks and Romans who, standing out from the Orthodox pagans of their times, equally doubted the story of Hercules and the whale, and Arion and the dolphin. And yet their doubting those traditions did not make those traditions one whit the less facts for all that. One old Sag Harbor whaleman's chief reason for questioning the Hebrew story was this. He had one of those quaint old-fashioned Bibles embellished with curious, unscientific plates, one of which represented Jonah's whale with 2 spouts in his head, a peculiarity only true with respect to a species of the Leviathan, the right whale, and the varieties of that order, concerning which the fishermen have this saying, a penny roll would choke him. His swallow is so very small. But to this, Bishop Jebb's anticipative answer is ready. It is not necessary, hints the bishop, that we consider Jonah as tombed in the whale's belly, but as temporarily lodged in some part of his mouth. And this seems reasonable enough in the good bishop, for truly the right whale's mouth would accommodate a couple of whist tables and comfortably seat all the players. Possibly, too, Jonah might have ensconced himself in a hollow tooth. But on second thoughts, the right whale is toothless. Another reason which Sag Harbor, he went by that name, urged for his want of faith in this matter of the prophet, was something obscurely in reference to his incarcerated body and the whale's gastric juices. But this objection likewise falls to the ground, because a German exegetist supposes that Jonah must have taken refuge in the floating body of a dead whale, even as the French soldiers in the Russian campaign turned their dead horses into tents and crawled into them. Besides, it has been divined by other continental commentators that when Jonah was thrown overboard from the Joppa ship, he straightway effected his escape to another vessel nearby, some vessel with a whale for a figurehead, and I would add possibly called the whale, as some craftsmen nowadays christen the shark, the gull, the eagle. Nor have there been wanting learned exegetists who have opined that the whale mentioned in the book of Jonah merely meant a life preserver, an inflated bag of wind, which the endangered prophet swam to, and so was saved from a watery doom. Poor Sag Harbor, therefore, seems worsted all around. But he had still another reason for his want of faith. It was this, if I remember right. Jonah was swallowed by the whale in the Mediterranean Sea, and after 3 days, he was vomited up somewhere within 3 days' journey of Nineveh, the city on the Tigris, very much more than 3 days' journey across from the nearest point of the Mediterranean coast. How is that?
But was there no other way for the whale to land the prophet within that short distance of Nineveh? Yes, he might have carried him round by the way of the Cape of Good Hope, but not to speak of the passage through the whole length of the Mediterranean and another passage up the Persian Gulf and Red Sea. Such a supposition would involve the complete circumnavigation of all Africa in 3 days, not to speak of the Tigris waters, near the site of Nineveh, being too shallow for any whale to swim in. Besides, this idea of Jonah's weathering the Cape of Good Hope at so early a day would wrest the honor of the discovery of that great headland from Bartholomew Dias, its reputed discoverer, and so make modern history a liar. But all these foolish arguments of old Sag Harbor only evinced his foolish pride of reason, a thing still more reprehensible in him, seeing that he had but little learning except what he had picked up from the sun and the sea. I say it only shows his foolish, impious pride and abominable, devilish rebellion against the reverend clergy. For by a Portuguese Catholic priest, this very idea of Jonah's going to Nineveh via the Cape of Good Hope was advanced as a signal magnification of the general miracle. And so it was. Besides, to this day, the truly enlightened Turks devoutly believed in the historical story of Jonah. And some 3 centuries ago, an English traveler in Old Harris's Voyages speaks of a Turkish mosque built in honor of Jonah, in which mosque was a miraculous lamp that burnt without any oil. Chapter 84, Pitch Poling. To make them run easily and swiftly, the axles of carriages are anointed, and for much the same purpose, some whalers perform an analogous operation upon their boat. They grease the bottom. Nor is it to be doubted that, as such a procedure can do no harm, it may possibly be of no contemptible advantage, considering that oil and water are hostile, that oil is a sliding thing, and that the object in view is to make the boat slide bravely. Queequeg believes strongly in anointing his boat, and one morning, not long after the German ship Jungfrau disappeared, took more than customary pains in that occupation, crawling under its bottom where it hung over the side, and rubbing in the unctuousness as though diligently seeking to ensure a crop of hair from the craft's bald keel. He seemed to be working in obedience to some particular presentiment, nor did it remain unwarranted by the event. Towards noon whales were raised, but so soon as the ship sailed down to them, they turned and fled with swift precipitancy, a disordered flight as of Cleopatra's barges from Actium. Nevertheless, the boats pursued, and Stubbs was foremost. By great exertion, Pashtigo was at last succeeded in planting one iron, but the stricken whale, without at all sounding, still continued his horizontal flight with added fleetness. Such intermittent strainings upon the planted iron must sooner or later inevitably extract it. It became imperative to lance the flying whale, or be content to lose him. But to haul the boat up to his flank was impossible. He swam so fast and furious. What then remained? Of all the wondrous devices and dexterities, the sleights of hand and countless subtleties to which the veteran whaleman is so often forced, none exceed that fine maneuver with the lance called pitch poling. Small sword or broadsword, in all its exercises, boasts nothing like it. It is only indispensable with an inveterate running whale. Its grand fact and feature is the wonderful distance to which the long lance is accurately darted from a violently rocking, jerking boat under extreme headway. Steel and wood included, the entire spear is some 10 or 12 feet in length. The staff is much lighter than that of the harpoon, and also of a lighter material, pine. It is furnished by a small rope called a warp, of considerable length, by which it can be hauled back to the hand after darting. But before going further, it is important to mention here that though the harpoon may be pitch-poled in the same way with the lance, yet it is seldom done. And when done, it is still less frequently successful, on account of the greater weight and inferior length of the harpoon as compared with the lance, which in effect become serious drawbacks. As a general thing, therefore, you must get fast to a whale before any pitch-poling comes into play. Look now at Stubb, a man who, from his humorous, deliberate coolness and equanimity in the direst emergencies was specifically qualified to excel in pitch poling. Look at him. He stands upright in the tossed bow of the flying boat, wrapped in fleecy foam. The towing whale is 40 feet ahead, handling the long lance lightly, lancing twice or thrice along its length to see if it be exactly straight. Stubb whistlingly gathers up the coil of the warp in one hand, so as to secure its free end in his grasp, leaving the rest unobstructed. Then, holding the lance full before his waistband middle, he levels it at the whale. When covering him with it, he steadily depresses the butt end in his hand, thereby elevating the point till the weapon stands fairly balanced upon his palm, 15 feet in the air. He reminds you somewhat of a juggler, balancing a long staff on his chin. Next moment, with a rapid, nameless impulse, in a superbly lofty arch, the bright steel spans the foaming distance and quivers in the life spot of the whale. Instead of sparkling water, he now spouts red blood. That drove the spigot out of him, cries Stubb. 'Tis July's immortal 4th. All fountains must run wine today. Would now it were old Orleans whiskey, or old Ohio, or unspeakable old Monongahela. Then, Tashtego lad, I'd have ye hold a knacken to the jet, and we'd drink round it. Yea, verily, heart's alive, we'd brew choice punch in the spread of his spout hole there, and from that live punch pole quaff the living stuff. Again and again, to such gamesome talk, the dexterous dart is repeated, the spear returning to its master like a greyhound held in skillful leash. The agonized whale goes into his flurry, the tow line is slackened, the pitch poler dropping astern folds his hands, and mutely watches the monster die. Chapter 85. The Fountain. That for 6,000 years, no one knows how many millions of ages before, the great whales should have been spouting all over the sea and sprinkling and mystifying the gardens of the deep, as with so many sprinkling or mystifying pots, and that for some centuries back, thousands of hunters should have been close by the fountain of the whale, watching these sprinklings and spoutings. That all this should be, and yet that down to this blessed minute, 15 1/4 minutes past 1 o'clock p.m. on the 16th day of December, A.D. 1850, it should remain a problem whether these spoutings are, after all, really water or nothing but vapor. This is surely a noteworthy thing. Let us, then, look at this matter along with some interesting items contingent. Everyone knows that by the peculiar cunning of their gills, the finny tribes in general breathe the air which at all times is combined with the element in which they swim. Hence, a herring or a cod might live a century and never once raise his head above the surface. But owing to his marked internal structure, which gives him regular lungs like a human being's, the whale can only live by inhaling the disengaged air in the open atmosphere. Wherefore the necessity for his periodical visits to the upper world. But he cannot in any degree breathe through his mouth, for, in his ordinary attitude, the sperm whale's mouth is buried at least 8 feet beneath the surface, and what is still more, his windpipe has no connection to his mouth. No, he breathes through his spiracle alone, and this is on the top of his head.
If I say that in any creature, breathing is only a function indispensable to vitality, inasmuch as it withdraws from the air a certain element, which being subsequently brought into contact with the blood imparts to the blood its vivifying principle, I do not think I shall err, though I may possibly use some superfluous scientific words. Assume it, and it follows that if all the blood in a man could be aerated with one breath, he might seal up his nostrils and not fetch another for a considerable time. That is to say, he would then live without breathing. Anomalous as it may seem, this is precisely the case with the whale, who systematically lives by intervals his full hour and more when at the bottom without drawing a single breath, or so much as in any way inhaling a particle of air. for remember, he has no gills. How is this? Between his ribs and on each side of his spine, he is supplied with a remarkable involved Cretan labyrinth of vermicelli-like vessels, which vessels when he quits the surface are completely distended with oxygenated blood, so that for an hour or more, 1,000 fathoms in the sea, he carries a surplus stock of vitality in him, just as the camel crossing the waterless desert carries a surplus supply of drink for future use in its 4 supplementary stomachs. The anatomical fact of this labyrinth is indisputable, and that the supposition founded upon it is reasonable and true seems the more cogent to me when I consider the otherwise inexplicable obstinacy of that Leviathan in having his spoutings out, as the fishermen phrase it. This is what I mean. If unmolested, upon rising to the surface, the sperm whale will continue there for a period of time exactly uniform with all his other unmolested risings. Say he stays 11 minutes and jets 70 times, that is, respires 70 breaths. And whenever he rises again, he will be sure to have his 70 breaths over again to a minute. Now, after he fetches a few breaths, you alarm him so that he sounds. He will be always dodging up again to make good his regular allowance of air. And not till those 70 breaths are told will he finally go down and stay out his full term below. Remark, however, that in different individuals these rates are different, but in anyone they are alike. Now, why should the whale thus insist upon making his spoutings out, unless it be to replenish his reservoir of air descending for good? How obvious is it, too, that this necessity for the whale's rising exposes him to all the fatal hazards of the chase? For not by hook or by net could this vast Leviathan be caught when sailing 1,000 fathoms beneath the sunlight. Not so much skill, then, O hunter, as the great necessities that strike the victory to thee. In man, breathing is incessantly going on, one breath serving for 2 or 3 pulsations only, so that whatever other business he has to attend to, waking or sleeping, breathe he must, or die he will. But the sperm whale breathes only 1/7 or Sunday of his time. It has been said that the whale breathes only through his spout hole. If it could truthfully be added that his spouts are mixed with water, then I opine that we should be furnished with the reason why his sense of smell seems obliterated in him. For the only thing about him that at all answers to his nose is that identical spout hole. And being so clogged with 2 elements, it could not be expected to have the power of smelling. But owing to the mystery of the spout, whether it be water, whether it be vapor, no absolute certainty can yet be arrived at on this head. Sure it is, nevertheless, that the sperm whale has no proper olfactories. But what does he want of them? No roses, no violets, no cologne water in the sea. Furthermore, as his windpipe opens solely into this tube of his spouting canal, and as that long canal, like the Grand Erie Canal, is furnished with a sort of locks that open and shut for the downward retention of air or the upward exclusion of water, therefore the whale has no voice, unless you insult him by saying that when he so strangely rumbles, he talks through his nose. But then again, what has the whale to say? Seldom have I known any profound being that had anything to say in this world, unless forced to stammer out something by way of getting a living. Oh, happy the world is such an excellent listener. Now, the spouting canal of the sperm whale, chiefly intended as it is for the conveyance of air, and for several feet laid along horizontally just beneath the upper surface of his head, and a little to one side, this curious canal is very much like a gas pipe laid down in a city on one side of the street. But the question returns whether this gas pipe is also a water pipe. In other words, whether the spout of the sperm whale is the mere vapor of the exhaled breath, or whether that exhaled breath is mixed with water taken in at the mouth and then discharged through the spiracle. It is certain that the mouth indirectly communicates with the spouting canal, but it cannot be proved that this is for the purpose of discharging water through the spiracle, because the greatest necessity for doing so would seem to be when in feeding he accidentally takes in water. But the sperm whale's food is far beneath the surface, and there he cannot spout even if he would. Besides, if you regard him very closely and time him with your watch, you will find that when unmolested, there is an undeviating rhyme between the periods of his jets and the ordinary periods of respiration. But why pester one at all, one with all this reasoning on the subject? Speak out. You have seen him spout, then declare what the spout is. Can you not tell water from air? My dear sir, in this world, it is not easy to settle these plain things. I have ever found your plain things the naughtiest of all. And as for this whale spout, you might almost stand in it, and yet be undecided as to what it is precisely. The central body of it is hidden in the snowy sparkling mist enveloping it. And how can you certainly tell whether any water falls from it when, always, when you are close enough to a whale to get a close view of his spout? He is in a prodigious commotion, and the water cascading all around him. And if at such times you should think that you really perceive drops of moisture in the spout, how do you know that they are not merely condensed from its vapor? Or how do you know that they are not those identical drops superficially lodged in the spout hole fissure, which is countersunk into the summit of the whale's head? For even when tranquilly swimming through midday sea in a calm, with his elevated hump sun-dried as a dromedary's in the desert, even then the whale always carries a small basin of water on his head, as under a blazing sun you will sometimes see a cavity in a rock filled up with rain. Nor is it at all prudent for the hunter to be over-curious touching the precise nature of the whale spout. It will not do for him to be peering into it, putting his face in it. You cannot go with your pitcher to this fountain and fill it and bring it away. For even when coming into slight contact with the outer vapory shreds of the jet, which will often happen, your skin will feverishly smart from the acridness of the thing so touching it. And I know one who, coming into still closer contact with the spout, whether with some scientific object in view or otherwise, I cannot say, the skin peeled off from his cheek and arm. Wherefore, among whalemen, the spout is deemed poisonous. They try to evade it. Another thing I have heard said, and I do not much doubt it, that if the jet is fairly spouted into your eyes, it will blind you. The wisest thing the investigator can do then, it seems to me, is to let this deadly spout alone. Still, we can hypothesize, even if we cannot prove and establish. My hypothesis is this, that the spout is nothing but mist, and besides other reasons to this conclusion, I am impelled by considerations touching the great inherent dignity and sublimity of the sperm whale. I account him no common shallow being, inasmuch as it is an undisputed fact that he is never found on soundings or near shores. All other whales sometimes are. He is both ponderous and profound, and I am convinced that from the heads of all ponderous and profound beings, such as Plato, Pyrrho, the devil, Jupiter, Dante, and so on, there always goes up a certain semi-visible steam, while in the act of thinking deep thoughts. While composing a little treatise on eternity, I had the curiosity to place a mirror before me, and ere long saw reflected there a curious involved worming and undulation in the atmosphere over my head. The invariable moisture of my hair, while plunged in deep thought, after 6 cups of hot tea in my thin shingled attic of an August noon. This seems an additional argument for the above supposition.
And how nobly it raises our conceit of the mighty misty monster, to behold him solemnly sailing through a calm tropical sea, his vast mild head overhung by a canopy of vapor, engendered by his uncommunicable contemplations, and that vapor, as you will sometimes see it, glorified by a rainbow, as if heaven itself had put its seal upon his thoughts. For do you see, rainbows do not visit the clear air, they only irradiate vapor. And so, through all the thick mists of the dim doubts in my mind, divine intuitions now and then shoot, enkindling my fog with a heavenly ray. And for this, I thank God. For all have doubts, many deny, but doubts or denials, few along with them have intuitions. Doubts of all things earthly and intuitions of some things heavenly. This combination makes neither believer nor infidel, but makes a man who regards them both with equal eye. Chapter 86, The Tail. Other poets have warbled the praises of the soft eye of the antelope and the lovely plumage of the bird that never alights. Less celestial, I celebrate a tail. Reckoning the largest size sperm whale's tail to begin at that point of the trunk where it tapers to about the girth of a man, it comprises upon its upper surface alone an area of at least 50 square feet. The compact round body of its root expands into 2 broad, firm, flat palms, or flukes, gradually shoaling away to less than an inch in thickness. At the crotch, or junction, these flukes slightly overlap and sideways recede from each other like wings, leaving a wide vacancy between. In no living thing are the lines of beauty more exquisitely defined than in the crescentric borders of these flukes. At its utmost expansion in the full-grown whale, the tail will considerably exceed 20 feet across. The entire member seems a dense webbed bed of wetted sinews, but cut into it and you will find 3 distinct strata compose it, upper, middle, and lower. The fibers in the upper and lower layers are long and horizontal, those of the middle one very short and running crosswise between the outside layers. This triune structure, as much as anything else, imparts power to the tail. To the student of old Roman walls, the middle layer will furnish a curious parallel to the thin course of tiles, always alternating with the stone and those wonderful relics of the antique, and which undoubtedly contribute so much to the great strength of the masonry. But, as if this vast local power in the tenuous tail were not enough, the whole bulk of the Leviathan is knit over with a warp and woof of muscular fibers and filaments, which, passing on either side of the loins and running down into the flukes, insensibly blend with them and largely contribute to their might, so that in the tail, the confluent measureless force of the whole whale seems concentrated to a point. Could annihilation occur to matter, this thing were the thing to do it. Nor does this, its amazing strength, all tend to cripple the graceful flexion of its motions, where infantileness of ease undulates through a titanism of power. On the contrary, those motions derive their most appalling beauty from it. Real strength never impairs beauty or harmony, but often bestows it, and in everything imposingly beautiful. Strength has much to do with the magic. Take away the tied tendons that all over seem bursting from the marble in the carved Hercules, and its charm would be gone. As devout Eckermann lifted the linen sheet from the naked corpse of Gothel, he was overwhelmed with the massive chest of the man that seemed as a Roman triumphal arch. When Angelo paints even God, the Father, in human form, mark what robustness is there, and whatever they may reveal of the divine love in the Son, the soft, curled, hermaphroditic Italian pictures in which his idea had been most successfully embodied. These pictures, so destitute as they are of all brawniness, hint nothing of any power, but mere negative feminine one of submission and endurance, which on all hands is conceded, form the peculiar practical virtues of his teachings. Such is the subtle elasticity of the organ I treat of, that whether welded in sport or in earnest or in anger, whatever be the mood that it's in, its fluctuations are invariably marked by exceeding grace. Therein no fairy's arm can transcend it. 5 great motions are peculiar to it. First, when used as a fin for progression. Second, when used as a mace in battle. Third, in sweeping. Fourth, in lob-tailing. Fifth, in peaking flukes. First, being horizontal in its position, the Leviathan's tail acts in a different manner from the tails of all other sea creatures. It never wriggles, in man or fish. Wriggling is a sign of inferiority. To the whale, his tail is the sole means of propulsion. Scroll-wise coiled forwards beneath the body and then rapidly sprung backwards. It is this which gives that singular darting, leaping motion to the monster when furiously swimming. His side fins only serve to steer by. Second, it is a little significant that while one sperm whale only fights another sperm whale with his head and jaw, nevertheless, his conflicts with man, he chiefly and contemptuously uses his tail. In striking at a boat, he swiftly curves away his flukes from it, and the bow is only inflicted by the recoil. If it be made in the unobstructed air, especially if it descended to its mark, the stroke is then simply irresistible. No ribs of man or boat can withstand it. Your only salvation lies in eluding it. But if it comes sideways through the opposing water, then partially owing to the light buoyancy of the whaleboat and the elasticity of the materials, a cracked rib or a dashed plank or two, a sort of stitch in the side is generally the most serious result. These submerged side blows are so often received in the fishery that they are accounted mere child's play. One strips off a frock and the hole is stopped. Third, I cannot demonstrate it, but it seems to me that in the whale, the sense of touch is concentrated in the tail. For this respect, there is a delicacy in it, only equaled by the daintiness of the elephant's trunk. This delicacy is chiefly evinced in the action of sweeping, when in matingly gentleness, the whale with certain soft slowness moves his immense flukes from side to side upon the surface of the sea. And if he feel but a sailor's whisker, woe to that sailor, whiskers and all. What tenderness there is in the preliminary touch. Had this tail had any prehensile power, I should straightway bethink me of Darminodes, elephant that so frequented the flower market, and with low salutations presented nosegays to damsels and caressed their zones. On more accounts than one, a pity it is that the whale does not possess the prehensile virtue in his tail, for I have heard of yet another elephant, that when wounded in the fight, curved round his trunk and extracted the dart. Fourth, stealing unawares upon the whale in fancied security of the middle solitary seas, you find him unbent from the vast corpulence of his dignity, and kitten-like he plays on the ocean as if it were a hearth. But still you see his power in his play. The broad palms of his tail are flirted high into the air, then smiting the surface, the thunderous concussion resounds for miles. You would almost think a great gun had been discharged, and if you notice the light wreath of vapor upon the spiracle at his other extremity, you would think that this was the smoke from the touch hole. Fifth, as in the ordinary floating pressure of the Leviathan, the flukes lie considerably below the level of his back, and they are completely out of sight below the surface. But when he is about to plunge into the deeps, his entire flukes, with at least 30 feet of his body, are tossed erect in the air, and so remain vibrating a moment, till they downward shoot out of view. Excepting the sublime breach, somewhere else to be described, this peaking of the whale's flukes is perhaps the grandest sight to be seen in all animated nature. Out of the bottomless profunditides, the gigantic tail seems spasmodically snatching at the highest heaven. So in dreams I have seen majestic Satan thrusting forth his tormented colossal claw from the flame Baltic of hell. But in gazing at such scenes, it is all, in all, what mood you're in. If in the Dantean, the devils will occur to you, if that of Isaiah, the archangels. Standing at the masthead of my ship during a sunrise that crimson sky and sea, I once saw a large herd of whales in the east, all headed towards the sun, and for a moment vibrating in concert with the peaked flukes. It all seemed to me, at the time, such a grand embodiment of adoration of the gods was never beheld, even in Persia, the home of fire worshippers. As Ptolemy Philopater testified of the African elephant, I then testified of the whale, pronouncing him the most devout of all beings. For according to King Juba, the military elephants of antiquity often hailed the morning with their trunks uplifted, the profoundest silence.
The chance comparison in this chapter between the whale and the elephant, so far as some aspects of the tail of the one and the trunk of the other are concerned, should not tend to place those two opposite organs on an equality, much less the creatures to which they respectively belong. Whereas the mightiest elephant is but a terrier to the Leviathan, so, compared with Leviathan's tail, his trunk is but the stalk of a lily. The most direful blow from the elephant's trunk, whereas the playful tap of a fan compared with the measureless crush and crash of the sperm whale's ponderous flukes, which in repeated instincts have one after the other hurled entire boats with all their oars and crews into the air, very much as the Indian juggler tosses his balls. The more I consider this mighty tale, the more do I deplore my inability to express it. At times there are gestures in it, which, though they would well grace the hand of man, remain wholly inexplicable. In an extensive herd, so remarkable, occasionally, are these mystic gestures, that I have heard hunters who have declared them akin to Freemason signs and symbols. Let the whale, indeed, by these methods intelligently converse with the world. Nor are these wanting other motions of the whale in his general body, full of strangeness and unaccountable to his most experienced assailant. Dissect him how I may, then, I go but skin deep. I know him not, and never will. But if I know not even the tail of this whale, how understand his head? Much more, how comprehend his face, when his face he has none? Thou shalt see my back parts, my tail, he seems to say, but my face shall not be seen. But I cannot completely make out his back parts. And hint what he will about his face, I say again, he has no face. Chapter 87, The Grand Armada. The long and narrow peninsula of Malacca, extending southeastward from the territories of Burma, forms the most southerly point of all Asia. It is a continuous line from that peninsula stretch the long islands of Sumatra, Java, Bali, and Timor, which, with many others, form a vast mole or rampart, lengthwise connecting Asia with Australia, and dividing the long, unbroken Indian Ocean from the thickly studded Oriental archipelagos. This rampart is pierced by several sally ports for the convenience of ships and whales, conspicuous among which are the Straits of Sunda and Malacca. By the Straits of Sunda chiefly, vessels bound to China from the west emerge into the China seas. Those narrow Straits of Sunda divide Sumatra from Java, and standing midway in that vast rampart of islands, buttressed by that bold green promontory, known to seamen as Java Head, they not a little correspond to the central gateway opening into some vast walled empire. And considering the inexhaustible wealth of spices and silks and jewels and gold and ivory with which the 1,000 islands of that oriental sea are enriched, it seems a significant provision of nature that such treasures, by the very formation of the land, should at least bear the appearance, however ineffectual, of being guarded from the all-grasping Western world. The shores of the Straits of Sunda are unsupplied with those domineering fortresses which guard the entrances to the Mediterranean, the Baltic, and the Propontis. Unlike the Danes, these Orientals do not demand the obsequious homage of lowered topsails from the endless processions of ships before the wind, which for centuries past, by night and day, have passed between the islands of Sumatra and Java, frightened with the costliest cargoes of the East. But while they freely waive a ceremonial like this, they by no means renounce their claim to more solid tribute. Time out of mind, the piratical prowess of the Malays, lurking among the low-shaded coves and inlets of Sumatra, have sallied out upon the vessels sailing through the straits, fiercely demanding tribute at the point of their spears. Though by the repeated bloody chastisements they have received at the hands of European cruisers, the audacity of the corsairs has of late been somewhat repressed. Yet, even at present day, we occasionally hear of English and American vessels, which in those waters have been remorselessly boarded and pillaged. With a fair, fresh wind, the Pequod now drawing nigh to these straits, Ahab purposing to pass through them into the Javan Sea, and thence cruising northward, over waters known to be frequented here and there by the sperm whale, sweep inshore by the Philippine Islands, and gain the far coast of Japan, in time for the great whaling season there. By these means, the circumnavigating Pequod would sweep almost all the known sperm whale cruising grounds of the world, previous to descending upon the line of the Pacific, where Ahab, though everyone else foiled in his pursuit, firmly counted upon giving battle to Moby-Dick, in the sea he was most known to frequent, and at a season when he was most reasonably be presumed to be haunting it. But how now, in this zoned quest, does Ahab touch no land? Does his crew drink air? Surely he will stop for water. Nay. For a long time now, the circus-running sun has raced within his fairy ring, and needs no sustenance but what's in himself. So Ahab. Mark this, too, in the whaler. While other hulls are loaded down with alien stuff to be transferred to foreign wharves, the world-wandering whale ship carries no cargo but herself and her crew, their weapons and their wants. She has a whole lake's contents bottled in her ample hold. She is ballasted with utilities, not altogether with unusable pig lead and kentledge. She carries years' water in her, clear old prime Nantucket water, which, when 3 years aloft, then the Nantucketer in the Pacific prefers to drink for the brackish fluid, but yesterday rafted off in casks from the Peruvian or Indian streams. Hence it is that, while other ships may have gone to China from New York and back again, touching at a score of ports, the whale ship, in all that interval, may not have sighted one grain of soil, her crew having seen no man but floating seamen like themselves. So that, did you carry them the news that another flood had come, they would only answer, "Well, boys, here's the ark." Now, as many sperm whales had been captured off the western coast of Java in the near vicinity of the Straits of Sunda. Indeed, as most of the ground roundabout was generally recognized by the fishermen as an excellent spot for cruising. Therefore, as the Pequod gained more and more upon Java Head, the lookouts were repeatedly hailed and admonished to keep wide awake. But though the green, palmy cliffs of the land soon loomed on the starboard bow, and with delighted nostrils the fresh cinnamon was snuffed in the air, yet not a single jet was decried. Almost renouncing all thought of falling in with any game hereabouts, the ship had well nigh entered the straits, when the customary cheering cry was heard from aloft, and ere long a spectacle of singular magnificence saluted us. But here it be premised that, owing to the unwearied activity with which of late they had been hunted over all 4 oceans, the sperm whales, instead of almost invariably sailing in small detached companies, as in former times, are now frequently met in extensive herds, sometimes embracing so great a multitude that it would almost seem as if numerous nations of them had sworn solemn league and covenant for mutual assistance and protection. To this aggregation of the sperm whale into such immense caravans may be imputed the circumstances that even in the best cruising grounds, you may now sometimes sail for weeks and months together without being greeted by a single spout, and then be suddenly saluted by what sometimes seems thousands on thousands. Broad on both bows, at the distance of some 2 or 3 miles, and forming a great semicircle, embracing one half of the level horizon, a continuous chain of whale jets were up-playing and sparkling in the noonday air. Unlike the straight perpendicular twin jets of the right whale, which, dividing at top, fall over in 2 branches, like the cleft drooping boughs of a willow, the single forward slanting spout of the sperm whale presents a thick curled bush of white mist, continually rising and falling away to leeward. Seen from the Pequod's deck, then, as she would rise on a high hill of the sea, this host of vapory spouts, individually curling up into the air, and beheld through a blending atmosphere of bluish haze, showed like the thousand cheerful chimneys of some dense metropolis, decried of a balmy autumnal morning by some horseman on a height. As marching armies approaching an unfriendly defile in the mountains accelerate their march, all eagerness to place that perilous passage in the rear, and once more expand in comparative security upon the plain. Even so did this vast fleet of whales now seem hurrying forward through the straits, gradually contracting the wings of their semicircle and swimming on in one solid but still concentric circle.
Crowding all sail, the Pequod pressed after them, the harpooneers handling their weapons and loudly cheering from the heads of their yet suspended boats. If the wind only held, little doubt had that they chased through these straits of Sunda, the vast host would only deploy into the Oriental seas to witness the capture of not a few of their number. And who could tell whether in that congregated caravan, Moby-Dick himself might not be temporarily be swimming, like the worshipped white elephant in the coronation procession of the Siamese. So with stun sail piled on stun sail, we sailed along, driving these leviathans before us, when all of a sudden the voice of Tashtega was heard, loudly directing attention to something in our wake. Corresponding to the crescent in our van, we beheld another in our rear. It seemed formed of detached white vapors, rising and falling something like the spouts of the whales, only they did not so completely come and go, for they constantly hovered without finally disappearing. Leveling his glass at this sight, Ahab quickly revolved in his pivot hole, crying, "Aloft there, and rig whips and buckets to wet the sails! Malays, sir, and after us!" As if too long lurking behind the headlands, till the Pequod should fairly have entered the straits, those rascally Asiatics were now in hot pursuit to make up for their overcautious delay. But when the swift Pequod, with a fresh leading wind, was herself in hot chase, how very kind of these tawny philanthropists to assist in speeding her on to her own chosen pursuit, mere riding whips and rowels to her that they were. As with glass under arm, Ahab to and fro paced the deck, in his forward turn beholding the monsters he chased, and in the after one, the bloodthirsty pirates chasing him, some such fancy as the above seemed his. And when he glanced upon the green walls of the watery defile in which the ship was then sailing, and bethought him that through the gate lay the route to his vengeance, and beheld how through that same gate he was now both chasing and being chased to his deadly end, and not only that, but a herd of remorseless wild pirates and inhuman atheistical devils were infernally cheering him on with their curses. When all these conceits passed through his brain, Ahab's brow was left gaunt and ribbed, like the black sand beach after some stormy tide has been gnawing it, without being able to drag the firm thing from its place. But thoughts like these troubled very few of the reckless crew, and when after steadily dropping the pirates astern, the Pequod at last shot the vivid green Cockatoo Point on the Sumatra side, emerging at last upon the broad waters beyond, then the harpooneers seemed more to grieve that the swift whales had been gaining upon the ship than to rejoice that the ship had so victoriously gained upon the Malays. But still driving on in the wake of the whales, at last they seemed abating their speed. Gradually the ship neared them, and the wind now dying away, word was passed to spring to the boats. But no sooner did the herd, by some presumed wonderful instinct of the sperm whale, become notified of the three keels that were after them, though yet a mile in their rear, than they rallied again, and forming in close ranks and battalions, so that their spouts all looked like flashing lines of stacked bayonets, moved on with redoubled velocity. Stripped to our shirts and drawers, we sprang to the White Ash, and after several hours pulling were almost disposed to renounce the chase, when a general pause and commotion among the whalers gave animating token that they were now at last under the influence of that strange perplexity of inert irresolution, which, when the fishermen perceive it in the whale, they say he is gallied. The compact martial columns in which they had been hitherto rapidly and steadily swimming were now broken up in one measureless rout, and like King Porus elephants in the Indian battle with Alexander, they seemed to be going mad with consternation. In all directions expanding in vast irregular circles, and aimlessly swimming hither and thither by their short, thick spoutings, they plainly betrayed their distraction of panic. This was still more strangely evinced by those of their number who, completely paralyzed as it were, helplessly floated like waterlogged dismantled ships on the sea. Had these leviathans been but a flock of simple sheep, pursued over the pasture by 3 fierce wolves, they could not possibly have evinced such excessive dismay. But this occasional timidity is characteristic of almost all herding creatures. Though banding together in tens of thousands, the lion-maned buffaloes of the West have fled before a solitary horseman. Witness, too, all human beings, how when herded together in the sheepfold of a theater's pit, they will, at the slightest alarm of fire, rush helter-skelter for the outlets, crowding, trampling, jamming, and remorselessly dashing each other to death. Best, therefore, withhold any amazement at the strangely gallied whales before us, for there is no folly of the beasts of the earth which is not infinitely outdone by the madness of man. Though many of the whales, it has been said, were in violent motion, yet is to be observed that as a whole the herd neither advanced nor retreated, but collectively remained in one place. As is customary in those cases, the boats at once separated, each making for some one lone whale on the outskirts of the shoal. In about 3 minutes' time, Queequeg's harpoon was flung. The stricken fish darted blinding spray in our faces, and then running away with us like a light, steered straight for the heart of the herd. Though such a movement on the part of the whales struck under such circumstances is in no wise unprecedented, and indeed is almost always more or less anticipated, yet does it present one of the more perilous vicissitudes of the fishery. For as the swift monster drags you deeper and deeper into the frantic shoal, you bid adieu to circumspect life, and only exist in a delirious throb. As blind and deaf, the whale plunged forward, as if by sheer power of speed to rid himself of the iron leech that had fastened to him. As we thus tore a white gash in the sea, on all sides menaced as we flew, by the crazed creatures to and fro rushing about us, our beset boat was like a ship mobbed by ice isles in a tempest, and striving to steer through their complicated channels and straits, knowing not what moment it may be locked in and crushed. But not a bit daunted, Queequeg steered us manfully, now sheering off from this monster directly in our route in advance, now edging away from that, whose colossal flukes were suspended overhead, all white all the time. Starbuck stood up in the bows, lance in hand, pricking out of our way whatever whales he could reach by short darts, for there was no time to make long ones. Nor were the oarsmen quite idle, though their wonted duty was now altogether dispensed with. They chiefly attended to the shouting part of the business. "Out of the way, Commodore!" cried one, to a great dromedary that all of a sudden rose bodily to the surface and for an instant threatened to swamp us. "Hard down with your tail there!" cried a second to another, which, close to our gunwale, seemed calmly cooling himself with his own fan-like extremity. All whaleboats carry certain curious contrivances, originally invented by the Nantucket Indians, called drugs. 2 thick squares of wood of equal size are stoutly clenched together, so that they cross each other's grain at right angles. A line of considerable length is then attached to the bindle of this block, and on the other end of the line being looped, it can in a moment be fastened to a harpoon. It is chiefly among gallied whales that the drug is used. For then, more whales are close round you than you could possibly chase at one time. But sperm whales are not every day encountered. While you may, then, you must kill all you can. And if you cannot kill them all at once, you must wing them, so that they can be afterwards killed at your leisure. Hence it is that at times like these, the drug comes into requisition. Our boat was furnished with 3 of them. The first and second were successfully darted, and we saw the whales staggeringly running off, fettered by the enormous sidelong resistance of the towing drug. They were cramped like malefactors with the chain and ball. But upon flinging the third, in the act of tossing overboard the clumsy wooden block, it caught under one of the seats of the boat, and in an instant tore it out and carried it away, dropping the oarsman in the boat's bottom as the seat slid out from under him. On both sides, the sea came in at the wounded planks, but we stuffed 2 or 3 drawers and shirts in, and so stopped the leaks for a time. It had been next to impossible to dart these drugged harpoons, and were it not that as we advanced that into the herd, our whale's way greatly diminished. Moreover, that as we went still further and further from the circumference of commotion, the direful disorder seemed waning, so that when at last the jerking harpoon drew out and the towering whale sideways vanished, then, with the tapering force of his parting momentum, we glided between 2 whales into the innermost heart of the shoal, as if from some mountain torrent we had slid into a serene valley lake. Here the storms in the roaring glens between the outermost whales were heard but not felt. In this central expanse, the sea presented that smooth satin-like surface called a sleep, produced by the subtle moisture thrown off the whale when in his more quiet moods. Yes, we were now in that enchanted calm which they say lurks at the heart of every commotion. And still, in the distracted distance, we beheld the tumults of the outer concentric circles, and saw successive pods of whales, 8 or 10 in each, swiftly going round and round like multiplied spans of horses in a ring, and so closely shoulder to shoulder that a titanic circus rider might easily have overarched the middle ones and so gone round to their backs. Owing to the density of the crowd of reposing whales, more immediately surrounding the embayed axis of the herd, no possible chance of escape was at present afforded us. We must watch for a breach in the living wall that hemmed us in, the wall that had only admitted us in order to shut us up. Keeping at the center of the lake, we were occasionally visited by small tame cows and calves, the women and children of this routed host.
Now, inclusive of the occasional wide intervals between the revolving outer circles, and inclusive of the spaces between the various pods in any one of those circles, the entire area at this juncture, embraced by the whole multitude, must have contained at least 2 or 3 square miles. At any rate, though indeed such a test at such a time might be deceptive, spoutings might be discovered from our low boat that seemed playing up almost from the rim of the horizon. I mention this circumstance because, as if the cows and calves had been purposely locked up in this innermost fold, and as if the wide extent of the herd had hitherto prevented them from learning the precise cause of its stopping, or possibly, being so young, unsophisticated, in every way innocent and inexperienced, however it may have been, these smaller whales, now and then visiting our becalmed boat from the margin of the lake, evinced a wondrous fearlessness and confidence, or else a still becharmed panic, which it was impossible not to marvel at. Like household dogs, they came snuffling round us, right up to our gunwales, and touching them, till it almost seemed that some spell had suddenly domesticated them. Queequeg patted their foreheads. Starbuck scratched their backs with his lance, but fearful of the consequences, for the time refrained from darting it. But far beneath this wondrous world upon the surface, another and still stranger world met our eyes as we gazed over the side. For, suspended in those watery vaults, floated the forms of the nursing mothers of the whales, and those that by their enormous girth seemed shortly to become mothers. The lake, as I have hinted, was to a considerable depth exceedingly transparent, and as human infants while suckling calmly and fixedly gaze away from the breast, as if leading 2 different lives at the time, and while yet drawing mortal nourishment, be still spiritually feasting upon some unearthly reminiscence, even so did the young of these whales seem looking up towards us, but not at us, as if we were but a gulfweed in their newborn sight. Floating on their sides, the mothers also seemed quietly eyeing us. One of these little infants, that from certain queer tokens seemed hardly a day old, might have measured some 14 feet in length and some 6 feet in girth. He was a little frisky, though as yet his body seemed scarce recovered from that irksome position it had so lately occupied in the maternal reticule, where tail to head, and all ready for the final spring, the unborn whale lies bent like a Tartar's bow. The delicate side fins and the palms of his fluke still freshly retained the plaited, crumpled appearance of a baby's ears newly arrived from foreign parts. "Line, line," cried Queequeg, looking over the gunwale. "Him fast, him fast. Who lined him? Who struck? 2 whale, 1 big, 1 little." "What ails ye, man?" cried Starbuck. "Look'ee here," said Queequeg, pointing down. As when the stricken whale, that from the tub has reeled out hundreds of fathoms of rope, as, after deep sounding, he floats up again and shows the slackened curling line buoyantly rising and spiraling towards the air, so now Starbuck saw long coils of the umbilical cord of Madame Leviathan, by which the young cub seemed still tethered to its dam. Not seldom in the rapid vicissitudes of the chase, this natural line, with the maternal end loose, becomes entangled with the hempen one, so that the cub is thereby trapped. Some of the subtlest secrets of the seas seemed divulged to us in this enchanted pond. We saw young Leviathan amours in the deep. And thus, though surrounded by circle upon circle of consternations and affrights, did these inscrutable creatures at the center freely and fearlessly indulge in all peaceful concernments, yea, serenely reveled in dalliance and delight. But even so, amid the tornadoed Atlantic of my being, do I myself still forever centrally disport in mute calm, and while ponderous planets of unwaning woe revolve around me, deep down and deep inland, there I still bathe me in eternal mildness of joy. Meanwhile, as we thus lay entranced, the occasional sudden frantic spectacles in the distance evinced the activity of the other boats, still engaged in drugging the whales on the frontier of the host, or possibly carrying on the war within the first circle, where abundance of room and some convenient retreats were afforded them. But the sight of the enraged, drugged whales now and then blindly darting to and fro across the circles was nothing to what at last met our eyes. It is sometime the custom, when fast to a whale more than commonly powerful and alert, to seek to hamstring him, as it were, by sundering or maiming his gigantic tail tendon. It is done by darting a short-handled cutting spade, to which is attached a rope for hauling it back again. A whale wounded, as we afterwards learned in this part, but not effectually as it seemed, had broken away from the boat, carrying along with him half of the harpoon line, and in the extraordinary agony of the wound, he was now dashing among the revolving circles like the lone mounted desperado Arnold at the Battle of Saratoga, carrying dismay wherever he went. But agonizing as was the wound of this whale, and an appalling spectacle enough anyway, yet the peculiar horror with which he seemed to inspire the rest of the herd was owing to a cause which at first the intervening distance obscured from us. But at length we perceived that by one of the unimaginable accidents of the fishery, this whale had become entangled in the harpoon line that he towed. He had also run away with the cutting spade in him, and while the free end of the rope attached to that weapon had permanently caught in the coils of the harpoon line round his tail, the cutting spade itself had worked loose from his flesh. So that, tormented to madness, he was now churning through the water, violently flailing with his flexible tail and tossing the keen spade about him, wounding and murdering his own comrades. This terrific object seemed to recall the whole herd from their stationary fright. First, the whales forming the margin of our lake began to crowd a little and tumble against each other, as if lifted by half-spent billows from afar. Then the lake itself began faintly to heave and swell. The submarine bridal chambers and nurseries vanished. In more and more contracting orbits, the whales in the more central circles began to swim in thickening clusters. Yes, the long calm was departing. The low advancing hum was soon heard, and then, like to the tumultuous masses of block ice when the great river Hudson breaks up in spring, the entire host of whales came tumbling upon their inner center, as if to pile themselves up in one common mountain. Instantly, Starbuck and Queequeg changed places, Starbuck taking the stern. "Oars, oars," he intensely whispered, seizing the helm. "Gripe your oars and clutch your souls now. My God, men, stand by. Shove him off, you Queequeg. The whale there, prick him, hit him. Stand up, and stay so. Spring, men, pull, men. Never mind their backs. Scrape them, scrape away." The boat was now all but jammed between two vast black bulks, leaving a narrow Dardanelles between their long lengths. But by desperate endeavor, we at last shot into a temporary opening, then giving way rapidly and at the same time earnestly watching for another outlet. After many similar hair-breadth escapes, we at last swiftly glided into what had just been one of the outer circles, but now crossed by random whales, all violently making for one center. This lucky salvation was cheaply purchased by the loss of Queequeg's hat, who, while standing in the bows to prick the fugitive whales, had his hat taken clean from his head by the air eddy made by the sudden tossing of a pair of broad flukes close by. Riotous and disordered as the universal commotion now was, It soon resolved itself into what seemed a systematic movement. And having clumped together at last in one dense body, they then renewed their onward flight with augmented fleetness. Further pursuit was useless, but the boats still lingered in their wake to pick up what drugged whales might be dropped astern, and likewise to secure one which Flask had killed and waifed. The waif is a pen in the pole, 2 or 3 of which are carried by every boat, and which, when additional game is at hand, are inserted upright into the floating body of a dead whale, both to mark its place on the sea and also as a token of prior possession should the boats of any other ship draw near. The result of this lowering was somewhat illustrative of that sagacious saying in the fishery, the more whales, the less fish. Of all the drugged whales, only one was captured. The rest contrived to escape for the time, but only to be taken, as will hereafter be seen, by some other craft than the Pequod.
Chapter 88, Schools and Schoolmasters. The previous chapter gave account of an immense body or herd of sperm whales, and there was also then given the probable cause inducing those vast aggregations. Now, though such great bodies are at times encountered, yet as must have been seen, even at the present day, small detached bands are occasionally observed, embracing from 20 to 50 individuals each. Such bands are known as schools. They generally are of 2 sorts, those composed almost entirely of females, and those mustering none but young vigorous males, or bulls, as they are familiarly designated. In cavalier attendance upon the school of females, you invariably see a male of full-grown magnitude, but not old, who, upon any alarm, evinces his gallantry by falling in the rear and covering the flight of his ladies. In truth, this gentleman is a luxurious ottoman, swimming about over the watery world, surroundingly accompanied by all the solaces and endearments of the harem. The contrast between this ottoman and his concubines is striking, because while he is always of the largest leviathantic proportions, the ladies, even at full growth, are not more than 1/3 of the bulk of an average-sized male. They are comparatively delicate indeed, I dare say not to exceed a half dozen yards round the waist. Nevertheless, it cannot be denied that upon the whole they are hereditarily entitled to embonpoint. It is very curious to watch this harem and its lord in their indolent ramblings. Like fashionables, they are forever on the move in leisurely search of variety. You meet them on the line in time for the full flower of the equatorial feeding season, having just returned, perhaps, from spending the summer in the northern seas, and so cheating summer of all unpleasant weariness and warmth. By the time they have lounged up and down the promenade of the equator a while, they start for the oriental waters in anticipation of the cool season there, and so evade the other excessive temperature of the year. When serenely advancing on one of these journeys, if any strange suspicious sights are seen, my Lord Whale keeps a wary eye on his interesting family. Should any unwarrantably pert young Leviathan coming that way presume to draw confidentially close to one of the ladies, with what prodigious fury the bashaw assails him and chases him away. High times indeed, if unprincipled young rakes like him are to be permitted to invade the sanctity of domestic bliss. Though do what the bashaw will, he cannot keep the most notorious Lothario out of his bed. For, alas, all fish bed in common. As ashore, the ladies often cause the most terrible duels among their rival admirers. Just so with the whales, who sometimes come to deadly battle, and all for love. They fence with their long lower jaws, sometimes locking them together, and so striving for the supremacy like elks that warringly interweave their antlers. Not a few are captured, having the deep scars of these encounters, furrowed heads, broken teeth, scalloped fins, and in some instances, wretched and dislocated mouths. But supposing the invader of domestic bliss to betake himself away at the first rush of the harem's lord, then it is very diverting to watch that lord. Gently, he insinuates his vast bulk among them again and again, and reveals there a while, still in tantalizing vicinity to young Lothario, like pious Solomon devoutly worshiping among his 1,000 concubines. Granting other whales to be in sight, the fishermen will seldom give chase to one of these Grand Turks, for these Grand Turks are too lavish of their strength, and hence their unctuousness is small. As for the sons and daughters they beget, why, those sons and daughters must take care of themselves, at least with only the maternal help. For like certain other omnivorous roving lovers that might be named, my Lord Whale has no taste for the nursery, however much for the bower, and so, being a great traveler, he leaves his anonymous babies all over the world, every baby an exotic. In good time, nevertheless, as the ardor of youth declines, as years and dumps increase, as reflection lends her solemn pauses, in short, as a general lassitude overtakes the sated Turk, then a love of ease and virtue supplants the love for maidens. Our Ottoman enters upon the impotent, repentant, admonitory stage of life, forswears, disbands the harem, and grown to an exemplary, sulky old soul, goes about all alone among the meridians and parallels, saying his prayers and warning each young Leviathan from his amorous errors. Now, as the harem of whales is called by the fishermen a school, so is the lord and master of that school technically known as the schoolmaster. It is therefore not in strict character, however admirably satirical, that after going to school himself, he should then go abroad, inculcating not what he learned there, but the folly of it. His title, schoolmaster, would very naturally seem derived from the name bestowed upon the harem itself, but some have surmised that the man who first thus entitled this sort of Ottoman whale must have read the memoirs of Vidocq and informed himself what sort of country schoolmaster that famous Frenchman was in his younger days, and what was the nature of those occult lessons he inculcated into some of his pupils. The same secludedness and isolation to which the schoolmaster whale betakes himself in his advancing years is true of all aged sperm whales. Almost universally, a lone whale, as a solitary leviathan is called, proves an ancient one. Like venerable moss-bearded Daniel Boone, he will have no one near him but nature herself. And her he takes to wife in the wilderness of waters, and the best of wives she is, though she keeps so many moody secrets. The schools composing none but young and vigorous males previously mentioned offer a strong contrast to the harem schools. For while those female whales are characteristically timid, the young males, or 40-barrel bulls as they call them, are by far the most pugnacious of all leviathans, and proverbially the most dangerous to encounter, excepting those wondrous gray-headed grizzled whales sometimes met, and these will fight you like grim fiends exasperated by a penal gout. The 40-barrel bull schools are larger than the harem schools. Like a mob of young collegians, they are full of fight, fun, and wickedness, tumbling around the world at such a reckless, rollicking rate that no prudent underwriter would insure them any more than he would a riotous lad at Yale or Harvard. They soon relinquish this turbulence, though, and when about 3/4 grown, break up and separately go about in quest of settlements, that is, harems. Another point of difference between the male and female schools is still more characteristic of the sexes. Say you strike a 40-barrel bull, poor devil, all his comrades quit him. But strike a member of the harem school, and her companions swim around her with every token of concern, sometimes lingering so near her and so long as themselves to fall a prey.
Fast fish and loose fish. The allusion to the waifs and waif poles in the last chapter, but one necessitates some account of the laws and regulations of the whale fishery, of which the waif may be deemed the grand symbol and badge. It frequently happens that when several ships are cruising in company, a whale may be struck by one vessel, then escape, and finally killed and captured by another vessel. And herein are indirectly comprised many minor contingencies, all partaking of one grand feature. For example, after a weary and perilous chase and capture of a whale, the body may get loose from the ship by reason of a violent storm and drifting far away to leeward. Be retaken by a second whaler who, in a calm, snugly tow it alongside without risk of life or line. Thus, the most vexations and violent disputes would often arise between the fishermen, were there not some written or unwritten universal undisputed law applicable to all cases. Perhaps the only formal whaling code authorized by legislature enactment was that of Holland. It was decreed by the States General in AD 1695. But though no other nation has ever had any written whaling law, yet the American fishermen have been their own legislators and lawyers in this matter. They have provided a system which, for terse comprehensiveness, surpasses Justin's Pandix and bylaws of the Chinese Society for the Suppression of Meddling with Other People's Business. Yes, these laws might be engraven on Queen Anne's farthing or on the barb of a harpoon and worn around the neck, so small they are. 1. A fast fish belongs to the party fast to it. 2. A loose fish is fair game for anybody who can soonest catch it. But what plays the mischief with this masterly code is the admirable brevity of it, which necessitates a vast volume of commentaries to expound it. First, what is a fast fish? Alive or dead, is a fish technically fast? When it is connected to an occupied ship or boat by any medium, all controllable by the occupant or occupants, a mast, an oar, a 9-inch cable, a telegraph wire, or a strand of cobweb, it is all the same. Likewise, a fish is technically fast when it bears a waif or any other recognized symbol of possession, so long as the party waifing it plainly evince their ability to take any time to take it alongside, as well as their intention to do so. There are scientific commentaries, but the commentaries of the whalemen themselves sometimes consist in hard words and harder knocks, like Coke upon Littleton of the Fist. True, among the more upright and honorable whalemen, allowances are made for peculiar cases, where it would be outrageous moral injustice for one party to claim possession of a whale previously chased or killed by another party, but others are by no means so scrupulous. Some 50 years ago, there was a curious case of a whale trover litigated in England, where the plaintiffs set forth that after a hard chase of a whale in the northern seas, they, the plaintiffs, had succeeded in harpooning the fish, but at last, through peril of their lives, were obliged to forsake not only their lines, but their boat itself. Ultimately, the defendants, the crew of the other ship, came upon with the whale, struck, killed, seized, and finally appropriated it before the very eyes of the plaintiffs. And when those defendants were remonstrated with, their captain snapped his fingers in the plaintiff's teeth and assured them, but by way of doxology to the deed he had done, he would now retain their line, harpoons, and boat, which had remained attached to the whale at the recovery of the value attached to the whale at the time of seizure. Wherefore, the plaintiffs now sued for the recovery of the value of their whale, line, harpoons, and boats. Mr. Erskine was counsel for the defendants. Lord Ellenborough was the judge. In the course of the defense, the witty Erskine went on to illustrate his position by alluding to a recent crime con case, wherein a gentleman, after in vain trying to bridle his wife's viciousness, had at last abandoned her upon the seas of life. But in the course of years, repenting at that step, he instituted an action to recover possession of her. Erskine was on the other side. He supported it by saying, though the gentleman had originally harpooned the lady, and had once held her fast, and only by reason of the great stress of her plunging viciousness had at last abandoned her, yet abandon her he did. So she became a loose fish, and therefore when a subsequent gentleman re-harpooned her, the lady became that subsequent gentleman's property, along with whatever harpoon might have been found sticking in her. Now, the present case, Erskine contended that the examples of the whale and the lady were reciprocally illustrative of each other. These pleadings and counterpleadings being duly heard, the very learned judge in set terms decided, to wit, that as for the boat, he awarded it to the plaintiffs because they had merely abandoned it to save their lives. But with regard to the controverted whale, harpoons, and line, they belonged to the defendants. The whale, because it was a loose fish at the time of final capture, and the harpoons and line because when the fish made off with them, it, the fish, acquired a property of those articles, and hence anybody who afterwards took the fish had a right to them. Now the defendants afterwards took the fish, ergo, the aforesaid articles were theirs. A common man looking at this decision of the very learned judge might possibly object to it, but plowed up to the primary of the rock of the matter, the two great principles down in the twin whaling laws previously quoted, applied and elucidated by Lord Ellenborough in the above cited case. These two laws touching fast fish and loose fish, I say, will, on reflection, be found the fundamentals of all human jurisprudence. For notwithstanding its complicated tracery of sculpture, the temple of the law, like the temple of the Philistines, has but two props to stand on. Is it not a saying that in everyone's mouth possession is half the law? That is, regardless of how things came into possession. But often possession is the whole law. What are the sinews and souls of Russian serfs and Republican slaves but fast fish? Possession is the whole of the law. What is the rapacious landlord? Is the widow's last mite but a fast fish? What is yonder undetected villain's marble mansion with a door place for a waif? What is that but a fast fish? What is the ruinous discount which Mordecai the broker gets from poor Woebegone the bankrupt on a loan to keep Woebegone's family from starvation? What is that ruinous discount but a fast fish? What is the Archbishop Save Soul's income of 100,000 pounds seized from the scant bread and cheese of hundreds of thousands of broken-back laborers, all sure of heaven without any of Save Soul's help? What is that globular 100,000 but a fast fish? What are the Dukes of Dunder's hereditary towns and hamlets but fast fish? What to that redoubted harpooner John Bull is poor Ireland, but a fast fish? What is that Apollistic lancer, brother Jonathan is Texas, but a fast fish? All concerning these, it is not possession the whole of the law.
But if the doctrine of fast fish be pretty generally applicable, the kindred doctrine of loose fish is still more widely so. This is internationally and universally applicable. What was America in 1492 but a loose fish in which Columbus struck the Spanish standard by way of waifing for his royal master and mistress? What was Poland to the Tsar? What Greece to the Turk? What India to England? What at last will Mexico be to the United States? All loose fish. What are the rights of man and the liberties of the world but loose fish? What all men's minds and opinions but loose fish? What is the principle of religious belief in them but a loose fish? What to the ostentatious smuggling verbalists are the thoughts of thinkers but loose fish? What is the great globe itself but a loose fish? And what are you, reader, but a loose fish, and a fast fish too? Chapter 90, Heads or Tails. De ballina vero sufficit, si rex habeat caput, et regina caudum. Rectum, L3, C3. Latin from the books of the laws of England, which taken along with the context means that of all whales captured by anybody on the coast of that land, the king, as honorary grand harpooner, must have the head, and the queen be respectfully presented with the tail. A division in which, in the whale, is much like having an apple. There is no intermediate remainder. Now, as this law, under a modified form, is to this day in force in England, and as it offers in various respects a strange anomaly touching on the general law of fast fish and loose fish, it is here treated of in a separate chapter, on the same courteous principle that prompts the English railways to be at the expense of a separate car, especially reserved for the accommodation of royalty. In the first place, in curious proof of the fact that the above-mentioned law is still in force, I proceed to lay before you a circumstance that happened within the last 2 years. It seems that some honest mariners of Dover, or Sandwich, or some one of the Cinque Ports, had, after a hard chase, succeeded in killing and beaching a fine whale, which they had originally descried far off the shore. Now, the Cinque Ports are particularly or somehow under the jurisdiction of a sort of policeman or beadle called a Lord Warden. Holding the office directly from the crown, I believe all the royal emoluments incident to the Cinque Port territories become by assignment his. By some writers, this office is called a sinecure, but not so. because the Lord Warden is busily employed at all times, informing his perquisites, which are chiefly his by virtue of that same fathering. Now, when these poor sunburnt mariners, barefooted and with their trousers rolled up high on their eely legs, had wearily hauled their fat fish high and dry, promising themselves a good 150 pounds from the precious oil and bone, and in fantasy sipping rare tea with their wives and good ale with their cronies, upon the strength of their respective shares, up steps a very learned and most Christian and charitable gentleman with a copy of Blackstone under his arm, and laying it upon the whale's head, he says, "Hands off, this fish, my masters, is a fast fish. I seize it as the Lord Warden's." On this, poor mariners in their respectful consternation, so truly English, knowing not what to say, fall to vigorously scratching their heads all round, meanwhile ruefully glancing from the whale to the stranger. But that did in no wise mend the matter, or at all soften the hard heart of the learned gentleman with the copy of Blackstone. At length one of them, after long scratching about for his ideas, made bold to speak. "Please, sir, who is the Lord Warden?" "The Duke." "But the Duke had nothing to do with taking this fish." "It is his. We've been in great trouble and peril and some expense. And is all that to go to the Duke's benefit? We get nothing at all for our pains but our blisters." "It is his." "Is the Duke so very poor as to be forced to this desperate mode of getting a livelihood?" "It is his." "I want to relieve my old bedridden mother by part of my share of this whale." "It is his." "Won't the Duke be content with a quarter or half?" "It is his." In a word, the whale was seized and sold, and the Grace the Duke of Wellington received the money. Thinking that viewed in some particular lights, the case might, by a bare possibility, in some small degree be deemed, under the circumstances, a rather hard one, an honest clergyman of the town respectfully addressed a note to his Grace, begging him to take the case of those unfortunate mariners into full consideration. To which my Lord Duke in substance replied, both letters were published, that he had already done so and received the money, and would be obliged to the reverend gentleman if for the future he, the reverend gentleman, would decline meddling with other people's business. Is this the still militant old man standing at the corners of the three kingdoms on all hands, forcing alms of beggars? It will be readily seen in this case that the alleged right of the Duke to the whale was a delegated one from the sovereign. We must needs inquire then on what principle the sovereign is initially invested with that right. That has already been set forth. But Plowden gives us the reason for it. Says Plowden, "The whale so caught belongs to the king and queen because of its superior excellence." And by the soundest commentators, this has ever been held a cogent argument in such matters. But why should the king have the head and the queen the tail? A reason for that, ye lawyers. In his treatise on Queen Gold or Queen Piminy, an old King's Bench author, one William Wynne, thus discourseth: "Ye tail is ye queen's, that ye queen's wardrobe may be supplied with ye whalebone." Now, this was written at a time when the black limber bone of the Greenland or right whale was largely used in ladies' bodices. But this same bone is not in the tail, it is in the head, which is a sad mistake for a sagacious lawyer like Grimm. But is the queen a mermaid to be presented with a tail? An allegorical meaning, may learn. There are two royal fish, so styled by the English law writers, the whale and the sturgeon, both royal property under certain limitations, and nominally supplying the 10th branch of the crown's ordinary revenue. I know not that any other author has hinted of the matter, but by inference it seems to me that the sturgeon must be divided in the same way as the whale, the king receiving the highly dense and elastic head peculiar to that fish, which, symbolically regarded, may possibly be humorously grounded upon some presumed congeniality. And thus there seems a reason in all things, even in law. Chapter 91. The Pequod meets the Rosebud. In vain it was to rake for ambergris on the paunch of this leviathan, insufferable fetor denying not inkle. Sir T. Brown, B.E. It was a week or two after the last whaling scene recounted, and when we were slowly sailing over a sleepy, vapory midday sea, that many noses on the Pequod's deck proved more vigilant discoverers than the 3 pairs of eyes aloft. A peculiar and not very pleasant smell was smelled from the sea. "I will bet something," said Stubb, "that somewhere hereabouts some of those drugged whales we tickled with. I thought they would keel up before too long." Presently, the vapors in advance slid aside, and there in the distance lay a ship whose furled sails betokened that some sort of whale must be alongside. As we glided nearer, the stranger showed French colors from his poop, and by the eddying cloud of vulture seafowl that circled and hovered and swooped around him, it was plain that the whale alongside must be what the fishermen call a blasted whale. That is, a whale that has died unmolested on the sea, and so floated an unappropriated corpse. It may well be conceived what an unsavory odor such a mass must exhale, worse than an Assyrian city in the plain, when the living are incompetent to bury the departed. So intolerable indeed is it regarded by some that no cupidity could persuade them to moor alongside of it. Yet there are those who will still do it, notwithstanding the fact that the oil obtained from such subjects is of a very inferior quality, and by no means of the nature of Adelaide Rose.
Coming still nearer with the expiring breeze, we saw that the Frenchman had a second whale alongside, and the second whale seemed even more of a nosegay than the first. In truth, it turned out to be one of those problematical whales that seem to dry up and die with a sort of prodigious dyspepsia or indigestion, leaving their defunct bodies almost entirely bankrupt of anything like oil. Nevertheless, in the proper place, we shall see that no knowing fisherman will ever turn up his nose at such a whale as this, however much he may shun blast whales in general. Pequod now swept so nigh to the stranger that Stubb vowed he recognized his cutting spade pole entangled in the lines that were knotted round the tail of one of those whales. "There's a pretty fellow now," he banteringly laughed, standing in the ship's bows. "There's a jackal for you. I well know that these crapos Frenchmen are but poor devils in the fishery, sometimes loading their boats with breakers and taking them to sperm whale spout. Yes, and sometimes sailing from their port with their hold full of boxes of tallow candles and cases of snuffers, or seeing that all the oil they'll get won't be enough to dip the captain's wick into. Aye, we all know these things. But look ye, here's a crapo that is content with our leaving the drugged whale there. I mean, aye, and is content too with scraping the dry bones of that other precious fish he has there. Poor devil. I say, pass round a hat, someone. Let's make him a present of a little oil for dear charity's sake. What oil he'll get from that drugged whale there wouldn't be fit to burn in a jail. No, not in a condemned cell. And as for the other whale, why, I'll agree to get more oil by chopping up and trying out these 3 masts of ours than he'll get from that bundle of bones, though, now that I think of it, may contain something worth a good deal more than oil. Yes, ambergris. I wonder now if our old man has thought of that. Worth trying. Yes, I'm in for it. And so saying, we started for the quarterdeck. By this time, the faint air had become a complete calm, so that whether or no the Pequod was now fairly entrapped in the smell, with no hope of escaping except by its breathing up again. Issuing from the cabin, Stubb now called his boat's crew and pulled off with a stranger. Rowing across her bow, he perceived that in accordance with the fanciful French taste, the upper part of her stem piece was carved in the likeness of a huge drooping stalk, painted green, and for thorns had proper spikes projecting from it here and there, the whole terminating in a symmetrical folded bulb of bright red color. On her headboard, in large gilt letters, he read, "Bouton de Rose," rose button or rosebud, and this was the romantic name of this aromatic ship. Though Stubb did not understand the bouton part of the inscription, yet the word rose and the bulbous figurehead put together sufficiently explained the whole to him. "A wooden rosebud, eh?" he cried, with his hand to his nose. "That'll do very well, but how like all creation it smells." Now, in order to hold direct communication with the people on deck, He had to pull round the bow to the starboard side, and thus come close to the blasted whale and so talk over it. Arrived then at this spot with one hand still to his nose, he bawled, "Bouton de rose, ahoy! Any of you bouton de roses that speak English?" "Yes," rejoined a Guernseyman from the bulwarks, who turned out to be the chief mate. "Well done, my bouton de rosebud. Have you seen the white whale?" "What whale?" "The white whale, a sperm whale, Moby-Dick. Have you seen him?" "Never heard of such a whale. Cachalot blanche, white whale, no." "Very good then. Goodbye now, and I'll call again in a minute." Then rapidly pulling back towards the Pequod and seeing Ahab leaning over the quarter-deck rail, awaiting his report, he molded his two hands into a trumpet and shouted, "No, sir, no!" Upon which Ahab retired, and Stubb returned to the Frenchman. He now perceived that the Guernseyman, who had just got into the chain and was using a cutting spade, had slung his nose in a sort of bag. "What's the matter with your nose there?" said Stubb. "Broke it?" "I wish it was broken, or that I didn't have any nose at all," answered the Guernseyman, who did not seem to relish the job he was at very much. "But what are you holding yours for?" "Oh, nothing. It's a wax nose. I have to hold it on. Fine day, ain't it?" Rather gardeny, I should say. Throw a bunch of posies, will you, bouton de rose?" "What in the devil's name do you want here?" roared the Guernseyman, flying into a sudden passion. "Oh, keep cool. Cool, yes, that's the word. Why don't you pack those whales in ice while you're working at them? But joking aside, though, do you know, Rosebud, that it's all nonsense trying to get any oil out of such whale? As for that dried up one there, he hasn't a gill in his whole carcass." "I know that well enough, but you see the captain here won't believe it. This is his first voyage. He was a cologne manufacturer before. But come aboard, and mayhap he'll believe you, if he won't me, and so I'll get out of this dirty scrape." "Anything to oblige you, my sweet and pleasant fellow," rejoined Stubb, and with that he soon mounted to the deck. There a queer scene presented itself. The sailors, in tasseled caps of red worsted, were getting the heavy tackles in readiness for the whale, but they worked rather slow and talked very fast and seemed in anything but a good humor. All their noses upwardly projected from their faces like so many jib booms. Now and then pairs of them would drop their work and run up to the masthead to get some fresh air. Some, thinking they would catch the plague, dipped oakum in coal tar and at intervals held to their nostrils. Others, having broken the stems of their pipes almost short off at the bowl, were vigorously puffing tobacco smokes that had constantly filled their olfactories. Stubb was struck by a shower of outcries and anathemas proceeding from the captain's roundhouse abaft, and looking in that direction, saw a fiery face thrust from behind the door, which was held ajar from within. This was the tormented surgeon, who, after in vain remonstrating against the proceedings of the day, had betaken himself to the captain's roundhouse, cabinet he called it, to avoid the pest, but still could not help yelling out his entreaties and indignations at times. Marking all this, Stubb argued well for his scheme, and turning to the Guernseyman, had a little chat with him, during which the stranger mate expressed his detestation of his captain as a conceited ignoramus who had brought them all into so unsavory and unprofitable a pickle. Sounding him carefully, Stubb further perceived that the Guernseyman had not the slightest suspicion concerning the ambergris. He therefore held his peace on that head, but otherwise was quite frank and confidential with him, so that the two quickly concocted a little plan for both circumventing and satirizing the captain, without his at all dreaming of distrusting their sincerity. According to this little plan of theirs, the Guernseyman, under cover of an interpreter's office, tell the captain what he pleased, but as coming from Stubb, and as for Stubb, he was to utter any nonsense that should come uppermost from him during the interview. By this time their destined victim appeared from his cabin. He was a small and dark but rather delicate-looking man for a sea captain, with large whiskers and mustache, however, and wore a red cotton velvet vest with watch seals at his side. To this gentleman Stubb was now politely introduced by the Guernseyman, who once ostentatiously put on the aspect of interpreting between them. "What shall I say to him first?" said he. "Why," said Stubb, eyeing the velvet vest and the watch and seals, "you may as well begin by telling him that he looks a sort of babyish to me, though I don't pretend to be a judge." "He says, monsieur," said the gentleman in French, turning to his captain, that only yesterday his ship spoke a vessel whose captain and chief mate with 6 sailors had all died of a fever caught from a blasted whale they brought alongside. Upon this the captain started and eagerly desired to know more. What now? Said the Guernseyman to Stubb. Why, since he takes it so easy, tell him that now I've eyed him carefully, I'm quite certain that he's no more fit to command a whale ship than a St. Iago monkey. In fact, tell him from me, he's a baboon. He vows and declares, monsieur, that the other whale, the dried one, is far more deadly than the blasted one. In fine, monsieur, he conjures us, as we value our lives, to cut loose from these fish. Instantly the captain ran forward, and in a loud voice commanded his crew to desist from hoisting the cutting tackle, and at once cast loose the cables and chains confining the whale to the ship. What now? Said the Guernseyman, when the captain had returned to them.
What now? Said the Guernseyman, when the captain had returned to them. Why, let me see. Yes, you may as well tell him now that in fact, tell him I've diddled him, and, aside to himself, perhaps somebody else. He says, monsieur, that he's very happy to have been any service to him. Hearing this, the captain vowed that they were the grateful parties, meaning himself and mate, and concluded by inviting Stubb down into his cabin to drink a bottle of Bordeaux. "We want you to take a glass of wine with him," said the interpreter. "Thank him heartily, but tell him it's against my principles to drink with the man I've diddled. In fact, tell him I must go." "He says, monsieur, that his principles won't admit of his drinking, but that if monsieur wants to live another day to drink, then monsieur had best drop all 4 boats and pull the ship away from these whales, for it's so calm they won't drift." By this time, Stubb was over the side, and getting into his boat, hailed the Guernseyman to this effect, that having a long tow line in his boat, he would do what he could to help them by pulling out the lighter whale of the 2 from the ship's side. While the Frenchmen's boats, then, were engaged in towing the ship one way, Stubb benevolently towed away at his whale the other way, ostentatiously slacking out a most unusually long tow line. Presently a breeze sprang. Stubb feigned to cast off from the whale, hoisting his boats. The Frenchman soon increased his distance, while the Pequod slid in between him and Stubb's whale. Whereupon Stubb quickly pulled to the floating body, and hailing the Pequod to give notice of his intentions, at once proceeded to reap the fruit of his unrighteous cunning. Seizing his sharp boat spade, he commenced an excavation in the body a little behind the side fin. You would almost have thought he was digging a cellar there in the sea. And when at length his spade struck against the gaunt ribs, it was like turning up old Roman tiles and pottery buried in fat English loam. His boat's crew were all in high excitement, eagerly helping their chief and looking anxious as gold hunters. And all the time numberless fowls were diving and ducking and screaming and yelling and fighting around them. Stubb was beginning to look disappointed, especially as the horrible nosegay increased, when suddenly, from out the very heart of this plague, there stole a faint stream of perfume, which flowed through the tide of bad smells without being absorbed by it, as one river will flow into and then along with another, all without blending it with it for a time. I have it, cried Stubb with delight, striking something in the subterranean regions. A purse! A purse! Dropping his spade, he thrust both hands in and drew out handfuls of something that looked like ripe Windsor soap or rich mottled old cheese, very unctuous and savory withal. You might easily dent it with your thumb. It is of a hue between yellow and ash color. And this, good friends, is ambergris, worth a gold guinea an ounce to any druggist. Some 6 handfuls were obtained, but more was unavoidably lost in the sea, and still more, perhaps, might have been secured, were it not for impatient Ahab's loud command to Stubb to desist and come on board, else the ship would bid them goodbye. Chapter 92. Ambergris. Now, this ambergris is a very curious substance, and so important as an article of commerce that in 1791, a certain Nantucket-born Captain Coffin was examined at the bar of the English House of Commons on that subject. For at that time, and indeed until a comparatively late day, the precise origin of ambergris remained, like amber itself, a problem to the learned. Though the word ambergris is but the French compound for gray amber, yet the two substances are quite distinct. For amber, though at times found on the seacoast, is also dug up in some far inland soils, whereas ambergris is never found except upon the sea. Besides, amber is a hard, transparent, brittle, odorless substance, used for mouthpieces to pipes, for beads and ornaments. But ambergris is soft, waxy, and so highly fragrant and spicy that it is largely used in perfumery, in pastilles, precious candles, hair powders, and pomatum. The Turks use it in cooking, and also carry it to Mecca for the same purpose that frankincense is carried to St. Peter's in Rome. Some wine merchants drop a few grains into claret to flavor. Who would think, then, that such fine ladies and gentlemen should regale themselves with an essence found in the inglorious bowels of a sick whale? Yet so it is. By some, ambergris is supposed to be the cause, and by others the effect, of the dyspepsia in the whale. How to cure such a dyspepsia it were hard to say, unless by administering 3 or 4 boatloads of Bandreth's pills, and then running out of harm's way, as laborers do in blasting rocks. I have forgotten to say that there were found in this ambergris certain hard, round, bony plates, which at first Stubb thought might be sailors' trouser buttons, but it afterwards turned out that they were nothing more than pieces of small squid bones, embalmed in that manner. Now that the incorruption of this most fragrant ambergris should be found in the heart of such decay, is this nothing? Bethink thee of that saying of St. Paul in Corinthians about corruption and incorruption, how that we are sown in dishonor but raised in glory. And likewise call to mind that saying of Paracelsus about what it is that maketh the best must. Also forget not the strange fact that of all things of ill savor, cologne water, in its rudimental manufacturing stages, is the worst. I should like to conclude the chapter with the above appeal, but cannot, owing to my anxiety to repel a charge often made against whalemen, and which, in the estimation of some already biased minds, might be considered as indirectly substantiated by what has been said of the Frenchman's 2 whales. Elsewhere in this volume, the slanderous aspersion has been disproved that the vocation of whaling is throughout a slatternly, untidy business, but there is another thing to rebut. They hint that all whales always smell bad. Now, how did this odious stigma originate? I opine that it is plainly traceable to the first arrival of the Greenland whaling ships in London, more than 2 centuries ago. Because those whalemen did not then, and do not now, try out their oil at sea, as the southern ships have always done, but cutting up the fresh blubber in small bits, thrust it through the bungholes of large casks and carry it home in that manner. The shortness of the season in those icy seas, and the sudden and violent storms to which they are exposed, forbidding any other course. The consequence is that upon breaking into the hold and unloading one of these whale cemeteries in the Greenland dock, a savor is given forth somewhat similar to that arising from excavating an old city graveyard for the foundations of a lying-in hospital. I partly surmise also that this wicked charge against whalers may be likewise imputed to the existence on the coast of Greenland in former times of a Dutch village called Schmerenberg or Smeerenberg, which latter name is the one used by the learned Foppe von Slack in his great work on smells, the textbook on that subject. As its name imports, smear, fat, berg, to put up. This village was founded in order to afford a place for the blubber of the Dutch whale fleet to be tried out without being taken home to Holland for that purpose. It was a collection of furnaces, fat kettles, and oil sheds, and when the works were in full operation, certainly gave forth no very pleasant savor. But all this is quite different with the South Sea sperm whaler, which in a voyage of 4 years perhaps, after completely filling her hold with oil, does not perhaps consume 50 days in the business of boiling out. And in the state that it is casked, the oil is nearly scentless. The truth is that, living or dead, if but decently treated, whales as a species are by no means creatures of ill odor, nor can whalemen be recognized, as the people of the Middle Ages affected to detect a Jew in the company, by the nose. Nor indeed can the whale possibly be otherwise than fragrant when, as a general thing, he enjoys such high health, taking abundance of exercise, always out of doors, although it is true seldom in the open air. I say that the motion of a sperm whale's flukes above water dispenses a perfume as when a musk-scented lady rustles her dress in a warm parlor. What then shall I liken to the sperm whale for fragrance, considering his magnitude? Must it not be to that famous elephant with jeweled tusks and redolent with myrrh, which was led out of an Indian town to do honor to Alexander the Great?
Chapter 93, The Castaway. It was but some few days after encountering the Frenchman that a most significant event befell the most insignificant of the Pequod's crew, an event most lamentable, and which ended in providing that sometimes madly merry and predestined craft with a living and ever accompanying prophecy of whatever shattered sequel might prove her own. Now in the whale ship, it is not every one that goes into the boats. Some few hands are reserved, called ship's keepers, whose province it is to work the vessel while the boats are pursuing the whale. As a general thing, these ship's keepers are hardy fellows as the men compromising the boat's crew. But if it happens to be an unduly slender, clumsy, or timorous wight in the ship, that wight is certain to be made a ship's keeper. It was so in the Pequod with the little Negro Pippin by the name, Pip by abbreviation, poor Pip. Ye have heard of him before. You must remember his tambourine on that dramatic midnight, so gloomy jolly. In outer aspect, Pip and Doughboy made a match, like a black pony and a white one, of equal developments, though of dissimilar color, driven in one eccentric span. But while hapless Doughboy was by nature dull and torpid in his intellects, Pip, though overly tender-hearted, was at bottom very bright, with that pleasant, genial, jolly brightness particular to his tribe, a tribe which ever enjoys all holidays and festivals with finer, freer relish than any other race. For blacks, the year's calendar should show not but 365 Fourth of Julys and New Year's days. Nor smile, so while I write this, that little black was brilliant, for even blackness has its brilliance. Behold yon lustrous ebony, handled in a king's cabinet. But Pip loved life and all life's peaceable securities, so that the panic-striking business in which he had somehow unaccountably become entrapped had most sadly blurred his brightness, though, as ere long will be seen, this was thus temporarily subdued in him. In the end was destined to be luridly illumined by strange wild fires that fractiously showed him oft 10 times the natural lustre with which in his native Toland County in Connecticut he had once enlivened with many fiddlers' frolics on the green, and at melodious eventide with his gay ha-ha had turned the round horizon into one star-belled tambourine. So though in the clear air of day, suspended against the blue-veined neck, the pure water diamond drop with helpful glow, yet when the cunning jeweler would show you the diamond in the most impressive luster, he lay it against a gloomy ground, and then lights it up, not by the sun, but by some unnatural gases. Then coming out of the fiery effulgences, infernally superb, then the evil blazing diamond, once the divinest symbol of the crystal skies, looked like some crown jewel stolen from the king of hell. But let us to the story. It came to pass that in the ambergris affair, Stubbs, after oarsman, chanced to sprain his hand, and as for a time to become quite maimed, and temporarily Pip was put in his place. The first time Stubb lowered with him, Pip evinced much nervousness, but happily for that time escaped close contact with the whale, and therefore came off not altogether discreditably, though Stubb observed him, took care afterwards to exhort him to cherish his courageousness to the utmost, for he might often find it needful. Now, upon the second lowering, the boat paddled upon the whale, and as the fish received the darted iron, it gave its customary rap, which happened in this instance to be right under poor Pip's seat. The involuntary consternation of the moment caused him to leap, paddle in hand, out of the boat, and in such a way that part of the slack whale line coming against his chest, he breasted it overboard with him, and so as to become entangled in it, when at last plumping into the water. That instant the stricken whale started on a fierce run, the line swiftly straightened, and presto, poor Pip came all foaming up into the chokes of the boat, remorselessly dragged there by the line, which had taken several turns around his chest and neck. Tashtego stood at the bows. He was full of fire of the hunt. He hated Pip for the poltroon. Snatching the bow knife from his sheath, he suspended its sharp edge over the line, and turning towards Stubb, exclaimed interrogatively, "Cut?" Meantime, Pip's blue-choked face plainly looked, "Do it, for God's sake!" All passed in a flash. In less than half a minute, this entire thing happened. Damn him cut, roared Stubb, and so the whale was lost and Pip was saved. So soon as he recovered himself, the poor little negro was assailed by yells and execrations from the crew. Tranquilly permitting these irregular cursings to evaporate, Stubb then, in plain, business-like, but still half-humorous manner, cursed Pip officially, and it was all done. Unofficially gave him a much wholesome advice. The substance was, never jump from a boat, Pip, except, but all the rest was indefinite, as the soundest advice ever is. Now, in general, stick to the boat is your true motto in whaling, but cases will sometimes happen when leap from the boat is still better. Moreover, as if perceiving at last that he should give undiluted conscious advice to Pip, he would be leaving him too wide a margin to jump in for the future, Stubb suddenly dropped all advice and concluded with a peremptory command, stick to the boat, Pip, or by Lord, I won't pick you up if you jump. Mind that. We can't afford to lose whales by the likes of you, a whale that would sell for 30 times what you would, Pip, in Alabama. Bear that in mind and don't jump any more. Hereby perhaps Stubb indirectly hinted that though a man loved his fellow, yet man is a money-making animal, which propensity too often interferes with his benevolence. But we are all in the hands of the gods, and Pip jumped again. It was under very similar circumstances to the first performance, but this time he did not breast out the line, and hence, when the whale started to run, Pip was left behind in the sea, like a hurried traveler's trunk. Alas, Stubb was too true to his word. It was a beautiful, bounteous blue day, the spangled sea calm and cool and flatly stretching away all round the horizon like gold beater's skin hammered out to the extremest. Bobbing up and down in the sea, Pip's ebon head showed like a head of clothes. No boat knife was lifted when he fell so rapidly astern. Stubb's inexorable back was turned upon him, and the whale was winged. In 3 minutes, a whole mile of shoreless ocean was between Pip and Stubb. Out from the center of the sea, poor Pip turned his crisp, curling black head to the sun, another lonely castaway through the loftiest and the brightest. Now, in calm waters, to swim in the open sea is as easy to practice swimmer as to ride in a spring carriage ashore. But the awful lonesomeness is intolerable. The intense concentration of self in the middle of such a heartless immensity, my God, who can tell it? Mark how, when a sailor in a dead calm bath in the open sea, mark how closely they hugged their ship and only coast along her sides. But had Stubb really abandoned the poor negro to his fate? No, he did not mean to, at least. But there were 2 boats in his wake, he supposed. No doubt they would of course come up to Pip very quickly and pick him up, though indeed such a consideration towards oarsmen jeopardized through their own timidity is not always manifested by the hunters in similar instances. And such instances not unfrequently occur. Almost invariably in the fishery, a coward, so-called, is marked with the same ruthless detestation particular to military navies and armies. But it so happened that those boats, without seeing Pip, suddenly spying whales close to them on one side, turned and gave chase. And Stubb's boat was now so far away that, and he and all his crew so intent upon his fish, that Pip's ringed horizon began to expand around him miserably. But by the merest chance, the ship itself at last rescued him. But from that hour, the little negro went about the deck an idiot, such at least that they said he was. The sea had jeeringly kept his finite body up, but had drowned the infinite of his soul. Not drowned entirely, though, rather carried down alive to wondrous depths, where strange shapes of the unwarped primal world glided to and fro before his passive eyes, and the miser merman, wisdom, revealed his hoarded heaps, and among the joyous, heartless, ever-juvenile entities, Pip saw the multitudinous, God omnipresent coral insects, that out of the firmament of water heaved the colossal orbs. He saw God's foot upon the treadle of the loom, and spoke it, and therefore his shipmates called him mad. So man's insanity is heaven's sense, and wandering from all mortal reason, man comes at last to that celestial thought, which to reason is absurd and frantic, and weal or woe feels then uncompromised indifferent as is God. For the rest, blame not Stubb too heartily. The thing is common in that fishery, and in the sequel of the narrative, it will be seen what like abandonment befell myself.
Chapter 94, A Squeeze of the Hand. That whale of Stubb's, so dearly purchased, was duly brought to the Pequod's side, where all those cutting and hoisting operations previously detailed were regularly gone through, even to the bailing of the Heidelberg tun or case. While some were occupied with this latter duty, others employed in dragging away the larger tubs so soon as filled with the sperm, and when the proper time arrived, the same sperm was carefully manipulated ere going to the try-works, of which anon. It had cooled and crystallized to such a degree that when with several others I sat down before a large Constantine's bath of it, I found it strangely concentrated into lumps here and there rolling about in the liquid part. It was our business to squeeze these lumps back into fluid, a sweet and unctuous duty. No wonder that in old times the sperm was such a favorite cosmetic, such a clearer, such a sweetener, such a softener, such a delicious mollifier. After having my hands in it for only a few minutes, my fingers felt like eels and began, as it were, to serpentine and spiralize. As I sat there at my ease, cross-legged on the deck, after the bitter exertion at the windlass, under a blue tranquil sky, the ship under indolent sail and gliding so serenely along, as I bathed my hands among those soft, gentle globules of infiltrated tissues, woven almost within the hour as they richly broke to my fingers and discharged all their opulence, like fully ripe grapes their wine, as I snuffed up that uncontaminated aroma, literally and truly like the smell of the spring violets. I declare to you that for the time I lived as in a musky meadow, I forgot all about our horrible oath. In that inexpressible sperm, I washed my hands and my heart of it. I almost began to credit the old Paracelsian superstition. The sperm is of rare virtue in allaying the heat of anger. While bathing in that bath, I felt divinely free from all ill will, or petulance, or malice, or any sort whatsoever. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. All the morning long, I squeezed that sperm till I myself almost melted into it. I squeezed the sperm till a strange sort of insanity came over me, and I found myself unwittingly squeezing my co-laborers' hands in it, mistaking their hands for the gentle globules. Such an abounding, affectionate, friendly, loving feeling did this avocation beget, that at last I was continually squeezing their hands and looking up into their eyes sentimentally, as much as to say, "Oh, my dear fellow beings, why should we longer cherish any social acerbities, or know the slightest ill humor or envy? Come, let us squeeze hands all round. Nay, let us all squeeze ourselves into each other. Let us squeeze ourselves universally into the very milk and sperm of kindness." Would that I could keep squeezing that sperm forever. For now, since my very prolonged repeated experience, I've perceived that in all cases, man must eventually lower or at least shift his conceit of attainable felicity, not placing it anywhere in the intellect or the fancy, but in the wife, the heart, the bed, the table, the saddle, the fireside, the country. Now that I have perceived all this, I'm ready to squeeze Case eternally. In thoughts of the visions of the night, I saw long rows of angels in paradise, each with his hands in a jar of spermaceti. Now, while discussing of sperm, it behooves to speak of other things akin to it, in the business of preparing the sperm whale for the try-works. First comes the white horse, so-called, which is obtained from the tapering part of the fish, and also from the thicker portions of his flukes. It is tough, with congealed tendons, a wad of muscle, but still contains some oil. After being severed from the whale, the white horse is first cut into portable oblongs ere going to the mincer. They look much like blocks of Berkshire marble. Plum pudding is the term bestowed upon certain fragmentary parts of the whale's flesh, here and there adhering to the blanket of blubber, and often participating to a considerable degree in its unctuousness. It is a most refreshing, convivial, beautiful object to behold. As its name imports, it is of an exceedingly rich mottled tint, with the bestreaked snowy and golden ground, dotted with spots of the deepest crimson and purple. It is plums of rubies and pictures of citron. Spite of reason, it's hard to keep yourself from eating it. I confess that I once stole behind the foremast to fry it. It tasted something as I should conceive a royal cutlet from the thigh of Louis le Gros might have tasted, supposing him to have been killed the first day after the venison season. And that particular venison season, contemporary with an unusually fine vintage of the vineyards of Champagne. There is another substance, and a very singular one, which turns up in the course of this business, for which I feel to be very puzzling adequately to describe. It is called Slobgolian, an appellation original with the whalemen, and even so, it's the nature of the substance. It's an ineffably oozy, stringy affair, most frequently found in the tubs of sperm after a prolonged squeezing and subsequent decanting. I hold it to be wondrously thin, ruptured membranes of the case coalescing. Gurry, so called, is a term properly belonging to right whalemen, but sometimes incidentally used by the sperm fishermen. It designates the dark glutinous substance which is scraped off the back of the Greenland or right whale, and much of which covers the decks of those inferior souls who hunt that ignoble leviathan. Nippers. Strictly, this word is not indigenous to the whale's vocabulary, but as applied by whalemen, it becomes so. A whaleman's nipper is a short, firm strip of tendinous stuff cut from the tapering part of a leviathan's tail. It averages an inch in thickness, and for the rest is about the size of the iron part of a hoe. Edgewise, moved along the oily deck, it operates like a leathern squilgee, and by nameless blandishments, as of magic, allures with it all impurities. But to learn about all these recondite matters, your best way is at once to descend into the blubber room and have a long talk with its inmates. This place has previously been mentioned as a receptacle for the blanket pieces when stripped and hoisted from the whale. When the proper time arrives for cutting up its contents, this apartment is a scene of terror to all tyros, especially by night. On one side, lit by a dull lantern, a space has been left clear for the workmen. They generally go in pairs, a pike and gaffman and a spademan. The whaling pike is similar to a frigate's boarding weapon of the same name. The gaff is something like a boat hook. With his gaff, the gaffman hooks onto a sheet of blubber and strives to hold it from slipping as the ship pitches and lurches about. Meanwhile, the spademan stands on the sheet itself, perpendicularly chopping it into the portable horse pieces. The spade is sharp as one can make it. The spades in his feet are shoeless. The thing he stands on will sometimes irresistibly slide away from him like a sledge. If he cuts off one of his own toes or one of his assistants, would you be very much astonished? Toes are scarce among veteran blubber room men.
Chapter 95, The Cassock. Had you stepped on board the Pequod at a certain juncture of this post-mortemization of the whale, and had you strolled forward nigh the windlass, pretty sure I am that you would have scanned with no small curiosity a very small enigmatical object, which you would have seen there lying along lengthwise in the lee scuppers. Not the wondrous cistern in the whale's huge head, not the prodigy of its unhinged lower jaw, not the miracle of his symmetrical tail. None of these would have surprised you as half a glimpse of that unaccountable cone, longer than a Kentuckian is tall, nigh a foot in diameter, the base, and jet black as Yojo, the ebony idol of Queequeg. And an idol indeed it is, or rather in old times, its likeness was. Such an idol as that found in the secret groves of Queen Makkah in Judea,
and for worshipping which King Asa her son did depose her and destroyed the idol and burnt it for an abomination at the brook Kendron, as darkly set forth in the 15th chapter of the first book of Kings. Look at the sailor called the mincer, who now comes along and, assisted by two allies, heavily backs the granzimus, as the mariners call it, and with bowed shoulders staggers off with it as if he were a grenadier carrying a dead comrade from the field. Extending it upon the forecastle deck, he now proceeds cylindrically to remove its dark pelt as an African hunter the pelt of a boa. This done, he turns the pelt inside out like a pantaloon leg, gives it a good stretching so as almost to double its diameter, and at last hangs it, well spread, in the rigging to dry. Ere long it is taken down, when removing some 3 feet of it towards the pointed extremity, and then cutting 2 slits for armholes at either end, he lengthwise slips himself bodily into it. The mincer now stands before you, invested in the full canonicals of his calling. Immemorial to all his order, this investiture alone will adequately protect him while employed in the peculiar functions of his office. That office consists in mincing the horse pieces of blubber for the pots, an operation which is conducted at a curious wooden horse planted endwise against the bulwarks, and with a capacious tub beneath it, into which the minced pieces drop fast as the sheets from a rapt orator's desk. Arrayed in decent black, occupying a conspicuous pulpit, intent on Bible leaves, with a candidate for the archbishopric what a lad for a pope were this mincer. Chapter 96. The Try-Works. Besides her hoisted boats, an American whaler is outwardly distinguished by her try-works. She presents the curious anomaly of the most solid masonry joining with oak and hemp in constituting the completed ship. It is as if from the open field a brick kiln were transported to her planks. The try-works are planted between the foremast and the mainmast, the most roomy part of the deck. The timbers beneath are of a peculiar strength, fitted to sustain the weight of an almost solid mass of brick and mortar, some 10 feet by 8 square and 5 in height. The foundation does not penetrate the deck, but the masonry is firmly secured to the surface by ponderous knees of iron bracing at all sides and screwing it down to the timbers. On the flanks, it is cased with wood, and at top completely covered by a large, sloping, battened hatchway. Removing this hatch, we expose the great try-pots, 2 in number, and each of several barrels' capacity. When not in use, they are kept remarkably clean. Sometimes they're polished with soapstone and sand till they shine within like silver punch bowls. During the night watches, some cynical old sailors will crawl into them and coil themselves away there for a nap. While employed in polishing them, 1 man in each pot, side by side, many confidential communications are carried on over the iron lips. It is a place also for profound mathematical meditation. It was in the left-hand tripod of the Pequod, with the soapstone diligently circling round me, that I was first indirectly struck by the remarkable fact that in geometry, all bodies gliding along the cycloid, my soapstone, for example, will descend from any point in precisely the same time. Removing the fireboard from the front of the try-works, the bare masonry of that side is exposed, penetrated by the 2 iron mouths of the furnaces directly underneath the pots. These mouths are fitted with heavy doors of iron. The intense heat of the fire is prevented from communicating itself to the deck by means of a shallow reservoir extending under the entire enclosed surface of the works. By a tunnel inserted at the rear, this reservoir is kept replenished with water as fast as it evaporates. There are no external chimneys. They open direct from the rear wall. And here let us go back for a moment. It is about 9 o'clock at night that the Pequod's try-works were first started on this present voyage. It belonged to Stubb to oversee the business. All ready there? Off hatch then, and start her. You cook, fire the works.
This was an easy thing, for the carpenter had been thrusting his shavings into the furnace throughout the passage. Here be it said that in the whaling voyage, the first fire in the try-works has to be fed for a time with wood. After that, no wood is used except as a means of quick ignition to the staple fuel. In a word, after being tried out, the crisp, shriveled blubber, now called scraps or fritters, still contains considerable of its unctuous properties. These fritters feed the flames like a plethoric burning martyr or self-consuming misanthrope. Once ignited, the whale supplies its own fuel and burns by its own body. Would that he consume his own smoke, for his smoke is horrible to inhale, and inhale it you must. And not only that, but you must live in it for the time. It has an unspeakable, wild, Hindu odor about it, such as may lurk in the vicinity of funeral pyres. It smells like the left wing of the day of judgment. It is an argument for the pit. By midnight, the works were in full operation. We were clear from the carcass. Sail had been made. The wind was freshening. The wild ocean darkness was intense. But that darkness was licked up by the fierce flames which at intervals forked forth from the sooty flues and illuminated every lofty rope in the rigging, as with the famed Greek fire. The burning ship drove on, as if remorselessly commissioned to some vengeful deed. So the pitch and sulphur-freighted brigs of the bold Canaris, issuing from their midnight harbors with broad sheets of flames for sails, bore down upon the Turkish frigates and folded them in conflagrations. The hatch removed from the top of the works now afforded a wide hearth in front of them. Standing on this were the Tartarian shape of the pagan harpooners, always the whaleship's stokers. With huge pronged poles, they pitched hissing masses of blubber into the scalding pots, or stirred up the fires beneath till the snarky flames darted, curling, out of the doors to catch them by the feet. The smoke rolled away in sullen heaps. To every pitch of the ship, there was a pitch of the burning oil, which seemed all in eagerness to leap into their faces. Opposite the mouth of the works, on the further side of the wide wooden hearth, was the windlass. This served for a sea sofa. Here lounged the watch, while not otherwise employed, looking into the red heat of the fire till their eyes felt scorched in their heads. Their tawny features now all begrimed with smoke and sweat, their matted beards, and the contrasting barbaric brilliancy of their teeth. All these were strangely revealed in the capricious emblazonings of the works. As they narrated to each other their unholy adventures, their tales of terror told in words of mirth, as their uncivilized laughter forked upwards out of them, like flames from the furnace, as to and fro in their front, the harpooneers wildly gesticulated with their huge pronged forks and dippers, as the wind howled on, and the sea leaped, and the ship groaned and dived, and yet steadfastly shot her red hell further and further into the blackness of the sea and the night, and scornfully champed the white bone in her mouth, and viciously spat round her on all sides. Then the rushing Pequod, freighted with savages and laden with fire and burning a corpse and plunging into that blackness of darkness, seemed the material counterpart of her monomaniacal commander's soul.
So it seemed to me as I stood at her helm and for long hours silently guided the way of the fire ship on the sea, wrapped for that interval in darkness myself, I but the better saw the redness, the madness, the ghastliness of others. The continual sight of the fiend shaped before me, capering half in smoke and half in fire, these at last begat kindred visions in my soul. As soon as I began to yield to that unaccountable drowsiness, for whichever would come over me at midnight helm. But that night in particular, a strange and ever since inexplainable thing occurred to me. Staring from a brief standing sleep, I was horribly conscious of something fatally wrong. The jawbone tiller smote my side. which leaned against it. In my ears was the low hum of sails just beginning to shake in the wind. I thought my eyes were open. I was half conscious of putting my fingers to the lids and mechanically stretching them still further apart. But spite of all this, I could see no compass before me to steer by, though it seemed but a minute since I had been watching the card by the steady binnacle lamp illuminating it. Nothing seemed before me but a jet gloom now and then, made ghastly by the flashes of redness. Uppermost was the impression that whatever swift, rushing thing I stood on was not so much bound to any haven ahead as rushing from all havens astern. A stark, bewildering feeling, as of death, came over me. Convulsively, my hands grasped at the tiller, but with that crazy conceit that the tiller was, somehow, in some enchanted way, inverted. My God, what is the matter with me? I thought. In my brief sleep, I had turned myself about and was fronting the ship's stern with my back to her prow and the compass. In an instant, I faced back, just in time to prevent the vessel from flying up in the wind and very probably capsizing her. How glad and how grateful the relief from this unnatural hallucination of the night and the fatal contingency of being brought on by the lee. Look not too long in the face of the fire, O man. Never dream with thy hand on the helm. Turn not thy back to the compass. Accept the first hint of the hitching tiller. Believe not in the artificial fire. When its redness makes things all look ghastly, tomorrow, in the natural sun, the skies will be bright. Those who glared like devils in the forking flames, the morn will show in far other, at least gentler relief. The glorious golden glad sun, the only true lamp, all others but liars. Nevertheless, the sun hides not Virginia's dismal swamp, nor Rome's accustomed Campagna, nor wide Sahara, nor all the millions of miles of deserts and reefs beneath the moon. The sun hides not the ocean, which the dark side of the earth, and which 2/3 of this earth. So therefore, that mortal man who hath more joy than sorrow in him, that mortal man cannot be true, not true, or underdeveloped. With books the same, the truest of all man was the man of sorrows, and the truest of all books is Solomon's, and Ecclesiastes is a fine hammered steel of woe. All is vanity, all. This willful word hath not hold of an unchristian Solomon's wisdom yet, but he who dodges hospitals and jails and walks fast at crossing graveyards would rather talk of operas than hell. Call Cowper, Young, Pascal, Rousseau, poor devils of sick man, and throughout a carefree lifetime swears by Rebellius as passing wise and therefore jolly. Not that man is fitted to sit down on tombstones and break the Greek damp of mold with an unfathomably wondrous Solomon. But even Solomon, he says, the man that wandereth out of the way of understanding shall remain, i.e., even while living, in the congregation of the dead. Give not thyself up, then, to fire, lest it invert thee, deaden thee as for a time it did me. There is wisdom in that woe, but there is woe in that madness. And there is a Catskill eagle in some souls that can unlike a dive down in the blackish gorge and soar out of them again and become invisible in the sunny spaces. And even though he forever flies within the gorge, that gorge is in the mountains, and so that even in his lowest swoop of the mountainous eagle is still higher than other birds upon the plain, even though they may soar. 97, the lamp. Had you descended from the Pequod's try-works to the Pequod's forecastle, where the off-duty watch were sleeping, for one single moment, you would have almost thought you were standing on some illuminated shrine of canonized kings and counselors. There they lay in their triangular oaken vaults, each mariner a chiseled muteness of score of lamps flashing upon his hooded eyes. In merchantmen, oil for the sailor is more sacred than milk of the queens. to dress in the dark and eat in the dark and stumble in the darkness to his palate. This is his usual lot. But the whaleman, as he seeks the food of light, so he lives in light. He makes his berth in Aladdin's lamp, and he lays down in it, so that in the pitchiest night, the ship's black hull still houses an illumination. See what entire freedom the whaleman takes in his handful of lamps. Often, but old bottles and vials, though, to the copper cooler at the Try works, and replenishes them as mugs of ale at a vat. He burns too the purest of oil in its unmanufactured and therefore unviolated state, a fluid unknown to solar, lunar, or astral contrivances ashore. It is as early grass. Oh, it's as early grass butter in April. He goes and hunts for his oil, and so to be sure of its freshness and genuineness, even the traveler on the prairie hunts up his own supper of game. 98. Stowing down and clearing up. Already had been related to how the great Leviathan is far off described from the masthead, how he chased over the watery moors and slaughtered in the valleys of the deep, how he is then thrown alongside and beheaded, and how, on the principle which entitled the headsman of the old garments in which the beheaded was killed, his great padded stir-out becomes the property of his executioner, how, in due times, he is condemned to the pots, and, like Sadrich, Neshika, and Abedango, his spermaceti oil and bone pass unscathed through the fire. And now it remains to conclude the last chapter of this part of describing, by rehearsing, singing, if I may, the romantic proceeding of decanting off his oil to the casks and striking them down in the hold, where once again Leviathan returns to his native profundities, sliding along beneath the surface as before, but alas, never more to rise and to blow. While still warm, the oil, like hot punch, is received into 6-barrel casks, and while perhaps the ship is pitching and rolling this way and that in the midnight sea, the enormous casks are slewed round and headed over, end on end, and sometimes perilously scoot across the slippery deck like so many landslides, till at last manhandled and stayed in their course, and all around the hoops rap, rap go so many hammers as to play upon them, for now, ex officio, every sailor is a cooper.
Continuing chapter 98. At length, when the last pint is cast and all is cool, then the great hatchways are unsealed, the bowels of the ship are thrown open, and down go the casks to their final rest in the sea. This done, hatches are replaced and hermetically closed, like a closet walled up. In the sperm fishery, this is perhaps one of the most remarkable incidents in all the business of whaling. One day the planks stream with freshets of blood and oil. On the sacred quarterdeck, enormous masses of the whale's head are profanely piled. Great rusty casks lie about as in a brewery yard. The smoke from the try-works has besooted all the bulwarks. The mariners go about suffused with unctuousness. The entire ship seems great Leviathan himself, while on all hands the din is deafening. But a day or two after, you look about, you prick your ears in this selfsame ship, and were it not for the telltale boats and try-works, you would all but swear you had trod some silent merchant vessel with a most scrupulously neat commander. The unmanufactured sperm oil possesses a singularly cleansing virtue. This is the reason why the decks never look so white as just after what they call an affair of oil. Besides, from the ashes of the burned scraps of the whale, a potent lay is readily made, and whenever any adhesiveness from the back of the whale remains clinging to the side, that lay quickly exterminates it. Hands go diligently along the bulwarks, and with buckets of water and rags restore them to their full tidiness. The soot is brushed from the lowering riggings. All the numerous implements which have been used are likewise faithfully cleansed and put away. The great hatch is scrubbed and placed upon the try-works, completely hiding the pots. Every cask is out of sight. All tackles are coiled in unseen nooks. And when by the combined and simultaneous industry of almost the entire ship's company, the whole of this conscientious duty is at last concluded, then the crew themselves proceed to their own ablutions, shift themselves from top to toe, and finally issue the immaculate deck fresh and all aglow as bridegrooms new leaped from out the daintiest Holland. Now with elated step, they pass the planks in twos and threes, and humorously discourse of parlors, sofas, carpets, and fine cambrics. Propose to mat the deck. Think of having hangings to the top. Object not to taking tea by moonlight on the piazza of the forecastle. To hint too much must mariners of oil and bone and blubber were little short of audacity. They know not the thing you distinctly allude to. Away and bring us napkins. But mark, aloft there at the three mastheads stand three men intent on spying out more whales, which, if caught, infallibly will again soil the old oaken furniture and drop at least one small grease spot somewhere. Yes, and many is the time when after severest uninterrupted labors, which know no night, continuing straight through for 96 hours, when from the boat where they have swelled their wrists with all day rowing on the line, they only step to the deck to carry vast chains and heave the heavy windlass and cut the slash, yea, in their very sweatings to be smoked and burned anew by the combined fires of the equatorial sun and the equatorial try-works, when, on the heel of all this, they have finally bestirred themselves to cleanse the ship and make a spotless dairy room of it. Many is the time the poor fellows, just buttoning the necks of their clean frocks, are startled by the cry of, "There she blows," and away they fly to fight another whale and go through the whole weary thing again. Oh, my friends, but this is man-killing, yet this is life, for hardly have we mortals, by long toilings, extracted from this world's vast bulk its small but valuable sperm, and then, with weary patience, cleansed ourselves from its defilements and learned to live here in clean tabernacles of the soul. Hardly is this done when, there she blows, the ghost is spouted up, and away we sail to fight some other world and go through young life's old routine again. Ah, metapsychosis, oh Pythagoras, that in bright Greece 2,000 years ago did die, so good, so wise, so mild. I sailed with thee along the Peruvian coast last voyage, and, foolish as I am, taught thee, a green simple boy, how to splice a rope. Chapter 99, The Doubloon. Ere now it has been related how Ahab was wont to pace his quarter-deck, taking regular turns at either limit, the binnacle and the mainmast. But in the multiplicity of other things requiring narration, it has not been added how that sometimes in these walks, when most plunged in his mood, he was wont to pause in turn at each spot and stand there strangely eyeing the particular object before him. When he halted before the binnacle, with his glance fastened on the pointed needle in the compass, that glance shot like a javelin with the pointed intensity of his purpose, and when resuming his walk, he again paused before the mainmast. Then, as the same riveted glance fastened upon the riveted gold coin there, he still wore that same aspect of nailed firmness, only dashed with a certain wild longing, if not hopelessness. But one morning, turning to pass the doubloon, he seemed to be newly attracted by the strange figures and inscriptions stamped on it, as though now, for the first time, beginning to interpret for himself in some monomaniac way whatever significance might lurk in them. And some certain significance lurks in all things, else all things are little worth, and the round world itself but an empty cipher, except to sell by the cartload, as they do hills about Boston to fill up upon morass in the Milky Way. Now this doubloon was of purest virgin gold, raked somewhere out of the heart of gorgeous hills, whence east and west, over golden sands, the headwaters of many Pactolus flow. And though now nailed amid all the rustiness of iron bolts and the verdigris of copper spikes, yet untouchable and immaculate to any foulness, it still preserved its Quito glow. Nor though placed amongst a ruthless crew, and every hour passed by ruthless hands, and through the livelong nights shrouded with thick darkness, which might cover any pilfering approach, nevertheless, every sunrise found the doubloon where the sunset left it last. For it was set apart and sanctified to one awe-striking end. And however wanton in their sailor ways, one and all, the mariners revered it as the white whale's talisman. Sometime they talked it over, and in the weary watch by night, wondering whose it was to be at last, and whatever it would ever live to spend it.
Now those noble golden coins of South America are as medals of the sun and tropic token pieces. Here palms, alpacas, and volcanoes, sun disk and stars, ecliptics, horns of plenty, and rich banters waving are in luxuriant profusion stamped, so that the precious gold seems almost to derive an added preciousness and enhancing glories by passing through those fancy mints so Spanishly poetic. It so chanced that the doubloon of the Pequod was a most wealthy example of these things. On its round border, it bore the letters República del Ecuador, Quito. So this bright coin came from a country planted in the middle of the world and beneath the great equator, and named after it. And that it had been cast midway up the Andes in the unwaning clime that knows no autumn. Zoned by those letters, you saw the likeness of 3 Andes summits, from one a flame, a tower on another, and on a third a crowing cock, while arching over all was a segment of the partition zodiac, the signs all marked with their usual cabalistics, and the keystone sun entering the equinoctial point at Libra. Before this equatorial coin, Ahab, not observed by others, was now pausing. There's something ever egotistical in mountain tops and towers,
and all other grand and lofty things. Look here, 3 peaks as proud as Lucifer. The firm tower, that is Ahab. The volcano, that is Ahab. The courageous, the undaunted, and victorious fowl, that too is Ahab. All are Ahab, and this round gold is but the image of the rounder globe, which, like a magician's glass, to each and every man in turn but mirrors back his own mysterious self. Great pains, small gains for those who ask the world to solve them. It cannot solve itself. Methinks now this coin sun wears a ruddy face, but see, aye, he enters the sign of storms, the equinox, and but 6 months before he wheeled out of a former equinox at Aries. From storm to storm, so be it, then born in throes. 'Tis fit that man should live in pains and die in pangs. So be it then. Here's stout stuff for woe to work on. So be it then. No fairy fingers can have pressed the gold, but devil's claws must have left their molding since yesterday, murmured Starbuck to himself, leaning against the bulwarks. The old man seems to read Belshazzar's awful writing. I have never marked the coin inspectingly. He goes below, let me read. A dark valley between 3 mighty heaven-abiding peaks that almost seem the Trinity in some faint earthly symbol. So in this veil of death, God girds us round, and over our gloom, the sun of righteousness still shines, a beacon and a hope. If we bend down our eyes, the dark veil shows her moldy soil. But if we lift them, the bright sun meets our glance halfway to cheer. Yet, oh, the great sun is no fixture, and if at midnight we would fain snatch some sweet solace from him, we gaze for him in vain. This coin speaks wisely, mildly, truly, but still sadly to me. I will quit it, lest truth shake me falsely. There's now the old mogul, soliloquized Stubb by Tryworks. He's been twigging it, and there goes Starbuck from the same, and both with faces which I should say might be somewhere within 9 fathoms long. And all from looking at a piece of gold, which did I have now on Negro Hill or in Corlear's Hook, I'd not look at it very long ere spending it. In my poor, insignificant opinion, I regard this as queer. I have seen doubloons before, now in my voyaging, your doubloons of old Spain, your doubloons of Peru, your doubloons of Chile, your doubloons of Bolivia, your doubloons of Papillon, with plenty of gold moradors and pistols and joes and half joes and quarter joes. What then should there be in this doubloon of the equator that is so killingly wonderful? By Goganda, let me read it once. Hello, here's signs and wonders truly. That now is what old Bowditch in his epitome calls the zodiac, and what my almanac below calls ditto. I'll get the almanac, and as I have heard devils can be raised with Dubois arithmetic, I'll try my hand at raising a meaning out of this queer curricue here with the Massachusetts calendar. Here's the book. Now, let's see now. Signs and wonders in the sun. He's always among them. Here they are. Here they go, all alive. Aries or the ram, Taurus or the bull, and Gemini. Here's Gemini himself or the twins. Well, the sun, he wheels among them. Aye, here on the coin, he's just crossing the threshold between 2 of 12 sitting rooms all in a ring. Book, you lie there. The fact is, you book must know your places. You'll do to give us the bare words and facts, but we come in to supply the thoughts. That's my small experience so far as the Massachusetts calendar and Bowditch's navigator and Dubois arithmetic goes. Signs and wonders, eh? Pity if there is nothing wonderful in signs and significant in wonders. There's a clue somewhere. Wait a bit. Hark. By Jove, I have it. Look, you doubloon, your zodiac here is the life of man in one round chapter. And now I'll read it off, straight out of the book. Come, almanac, To begin there's Aries, or the ram, lecherous dog. He begets us then. Taurus, or the bull, he bumps us the first thing. Then Gemini are the twins, that is, virtue and vice. We try to reach virtue, but lo, comes Cancer the crab and drags us back. And here, going from virtue Leo, a roaring lion lies in the path. He gives us fierce bites and surly dabs with his paw. We escape and hail Virgo the virgin. That's our first love. We marry and think to be happy for aye, when pop comes Libra or the scales. Happiness weighed and found wanting. And while we are very sad about that, Lord, how we suddenly jump. As Scorpio, or the scorpion, stings us in rear, we are curing the wound when whang comes the arrows all round. Sagittarius, or the archer, is amusing himself as we pluck out the shaft. Stand aside. Here's the battering ram, Copernicus, or the goat. Full tilt he comes rushing, and headlong we are tossed when Aquarius, or the water bearers, pours out his whole deluge and drowns us. And to wind up with Pisces, or the fishes, we sleep. There's a sermon now written high heaven, and the sun goes through it every year, and yet comes out of it all alive and hearty. Jolly he, aloft, wheels through toil and trouble, and so alow here does jolly Stub. Oh, jolly's the word for I, a dew to bloom. But stop, here comes little King Post, dodge around the try-works now, and let's hear what he'll have to say. There, he's before it. He'll out with something presently, so too he's beginning. I see nothing here but a round thing made of gold, and whoever raises a certain whale, this round thing belongs to him. So what's all this staring bit about? It's worth $16, that's true. And at 2 cents the cigar, that's 960 cigars. I won't smoke dirty pipes like Stub, but I like cigars, and here's 960 of them. So here goes, flask aloft and spy 'em out. Shall I call that wise or foolish now? If it really be wise, it has a foolish look to it. Yet, if it be foolish, then it has a sort of wise-ish look to it. But avast, here comes old Manxman, the old hearse driver. He must have been, that is, before he took to the sea. He luffs up before the doubloon, hello, and goes around on the other side of the mast. Why, there's a horseshoe nailed on that side, and now he's back again. What does that mean? Hark, he's muttering, voice like an old worn-out coffee mill. Prick ears and listen. If the white whale be raised, it must be in a month and a day, when the sun stands in one of these signs. I've studied signs and know their marks, and they're taught me 2 scores ago by the old witch in Copenhagen. Now, in what sign will the sun then be? The horseshoe sign? For there it is, right opposite the gold. And what's the horseshoe sign? The lion in the horseshoe sign, the roaring and devouring lion. Ship, oh ship, my head shakes to think of thee.
There's another rendering now, but still one text. All sorts of men in one kind of world you see. Dodge again. Here comes Queequeg, all tattooing. Looks like the signs of the zodiac himself. What says the cannibal? As I live, he's comparing notes, looking at his thigh bone. Thinks the sun is on the thigh, or in the calf, or in the bowels, I suppose, as the old women taught surgeons astronomy in the back country. And by Jove, he's found something there in the vicinity of his thigh. I guess it's Sagittarius, or the archer. No, you don't know what to make of the doubloon. He takes it for an old button off some king's trousers. But aside again, here comes the ghost devil, Kadala, tail coiled out of sight as usual, oakum in the toes of his pumps as usual. What does he say with that look of his? Only makes a sign to the sign and bows himself. There's a sun on the coin, fire worshipper, depend upon it. Ho, and more. This way comes Pip. Poor boy. Would he had died, or I. He's half horrible to me. He too has been watching all of these interpreters, myself included. And look now, he comes to read with that unearthly idiot face. Stand away again and hear him. Hark. I look, you look, he looks, we look, ye look, they look. Upon my soul, he's been studying Murray's grammar, improving his mind, poor fellow. But what's that he says now? Hist. I look, you look, he looks, we look, ye look, they look. Why, he's getting it by heart. Hist again. I look, you look, he looks, we look, ye look, they look. Well, that's funny. And I, you and he, and we, and ye and they are all bats. And I'm a crow, especially when I stand atop this pine tree here. Caw, 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 caw. Ain't I a crow? And where's the scarecrow? There he stands, 2 bones stuck into a pair of old trousers, and 2 more poked into the sleeves of an old jacket. I wonder if he means me. Complimentary, poor lad. I could go hang myself. Anyway, for the present, I'll quit Pip's vicinity. I can stand the rest, for they have plain wits, but he's too crazy witty for my sanity. So, I leave him muttering. Here's the ship's navel, this doubloon here, and they are all on fire to unscrew it. But unscrew your navel, and what's the consequence? Then again, if it stays here, that's ugly too, for when aught's nailed to the mast, it's a sign that things grow desperate. Old Ahab, the white whale, he'll nail ye. This is a pine tree. My father in old Collin County cut down a pine tree once and found a silver ring grown over in it. Some old darkie's wedding ring. How did it get there? And so they'll say in the resurrection, when they come to fish up this old mast and find a doubloon lodged in it, with bedded oysters for the shaggy bark. Gold, gold, the precious, precious gold. The green miser'll hoard ye soon. Hish, hish. God goes among the world's black bearing. Look, cook, ho, cook, and cook us. Jenny, hey, 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 Jenny, Jenny, and get your hoe cake done.